fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right, we're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stuff.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
Let's send you out on the right note. PFF sucks. Have a great day, everybody.
Wow.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube right after round one of the draft.
They've been getting kind of urgent with those countdowns. You notice that?
Yeah.
You know, it's a steady countdown and then two.
Sounded serious.
Yeah.
Sounded serious. So we're here. We're back. We're just here. We kicked Chris and Trevor out, and we're live.
Right out of the room.
So we appreciate everybody tuning in to the live draft show and now the recap. What we've done in the past, what we did until last year, was we said, oh, what were your favorite picks? Let's do a top five. What were you surprised by? Let's talk storylines. And then last year, we were like, what if? What if we just go pick by pick? Why don't we just analyze all of it right now?
What if we just redo the draft?
We
right
just
after
did
the draft.
a 4-hour draft show. Let's just do it again.
Yeah.
So here we are, ready to recap the entire draft.
Let's go.
So, you ready to go?
Absolutely.
Any surprises? Let's let people get to the chat. Tell your friends. We're going to be here all night. Caleb Williams goes number 1 overall to the Chicago Bears.
You called it.
I did.
Yeah.
Mock draft.
You and everybody else.
Intact. Not going to lie, 8-year-old Harry put his final mock out yesterday. He got some picks in there.
What did he get?
We had to go find it. But he got Caleb Williams.
Did he get Michael Penix Jr.?
He did not get Michael Penix Jr. to the Falcons. We'll talk about that at 8. Again, I don't know how much you want to talk about Caleb Williams, but we haven't given Williams a ton of general analysis this draft season because he's been locked in at 1, and we've mostly done mock drafts. So let's give a little bit of analysis on Caleb Williams, the player, and what the Bears are actually getting. I like the shirt, by the way. That's nice.
Thank you.
You lost the jacket after the show. I kept mine on.
Yeah. I lost. Well, so I was. What color would you call that jacket?
That's maroon.
Yeah. It comes dark. It comes across darker on camera, and comes across more like a pimp jacket than I would have liked when I put it on initially.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm like, I don't need to be dressed like a pimp for all the show.
Oh, so you decided
just the main one.
You took some feedback and applied it. Apparently.
So lost that. Just kept the shirt. This is one of the proper cloth shirts that we got way back when.
Yeah, that's nice.
You
guys can sponsor us again. We'll take some more free shirts.
Are we still killing time for people to get in the chat?
Oh, no. We're talking Caleb Williams.
Okay, Caleb Williams. Got it. You want me to talk now?
Yeah.
After having just talked. Okay.
Do you have any analysis? I wasn't killing time. I asked you to give analysis on Caleb Williams. I mean, I can give some.
I think Caleb Williams is a phenomenal prospect. I think he was clearly the top quarterback prospect in this draft. I think his concerns, if there are some, are smaller than people are talking about, really. Like, people act like he's this. I think his negative is similar to the Mahomes negative in his scouting report in terms of, what he does is great, but can he play from a pocket, right? And with Mahomes, I think that was a genuine question that we really didn't know the answer to at the time. I think for Caleb Williams, it's a much smaller question. He can play from the pocket. He can go through progressions within the pocket. His in-rhythm quarterbacking is actually really, really good. If you strip out all of the crazy high average time to throw stuff where he's just dancing around like a high schooler, the tape that you're left with is phenomenal. It's just that he adds all that other stuff. Now, you can quibble with, well, does he do that too much? And I think the answer is probably yes last year, and we can dial that down a bit. But I think that's way easier than taking a guy who just only wants to do that and doesn't want to play inside the pocket at all and trying to make him do that, which was more of the question for Mahomes.
Yeah, the thing about Caleb Williams going number 1 overall, it's not that he doesn't have flaws, not that he is 100% slam dunk, nobody is. Just you had to take that guy number 1, right?
Yeah.
The special is so special. Inside structure and outside of structure.
Now,
talent-wise, I think he's got as good a velocity throwing on the run as anybody who plays football.
Yes.
That includes Josh Allen and Mahomes, right? And every time we compare him to Mahomes, again, it's not equating. It doesn't mean he will have the same career. It just means there are some stylistic similarities. And to me, there are similar questions that, for both as prospects coming out of college.
The two comps that he gets most often are Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. Now, obviously, that is setting effectively a Hall of Fame bar if you were talking about quality of player, but it's stylistically that he's being comped to those guys. And in particular, his capacity to throw the ball from ridiculous arm angles and ridiculous body directions, like each one of those guys, their kind of calling card has always been they can be running full speed to the left and contort their body around and just flick their wrists and still fire in an absolute dart in 20 yards deep, right? Caleb Williams can do that. That's all over his tape. And it's, he does that as well as those two guys. That's why he gets those comps.
One thing I don't remember that we did, how we did it last year, do we want to talk about both Bears picks at the same time? Or do we want to go pick by pick?
Let's go by team because they're going to get chopped up by team later.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Rome Odunze going at 9 to the Bears. This was another one of those, it came up often. It felt like a best case scenario. The one thing I reminded people of last year at this time, coming out of the draft, the Bears had their pick.
No, they're not. This is it. So we go, no, let's keep it chronological. I changed my mind.
By each pick. We'll come back to Rome Odunze.
Yes. Circle back around.
Let's just reset for social.
Yeah.
Anything else on Caleb Williams?
No, I mean, again, we've known this was the case for a long time. It's the right pick. They circle back, as we'll get to later, with a receiver for him as well. It's a good situation now that the Bears have sort of done some work on that offense. The only concern sort of relative to somebody like Mahomes is obviously he's going to start from day one, right? Mahomes had the whole year effectively to sit and work on whatever his question marks were. Caleb Williams is going to have to answer them in training camp.
All right, so number 2, Jayden Daniels to the Washington Commanders. I found it interesting. There were reports that New England at 3 knew that this was the pick for about a month. So all the rumors and the smoke that Jayden Daniels was the guy, I think most people had assumed it. I still wasn't a firm believer. I didn't know that it was definitely going to happen. I thought they still could like Drake Maye. But nope, it's Jayden Daniels to the Commanders at 2.
Yeah. Shout out to, we had JT O'Sullivan in the chat. Is that what that is? Yeah, it is. There he is.
JT's in here?
Was, certainly. Maybe he's left now.
Wow.
Took one listen to us and bolted. Yeah, like we said this on the draft show. I think this next group of quarterbacks was pretty tightly grouped. It was just a case of what is the thing that you're most attracted to in terms of their strengths, and what is the thing you're most scared of, and or how high is your risk appetite for this specific thing. Jayden Daniels, I think, throws a really nice football. His athleticism is spectacular. He's extremely accurate. His question mark, to me, is, number 1, the crazy high sack rate and pressure to sack rate. Number 2, like just a reckless lunacy when it comes to protecting himself that it is not going to fly in the NFL. Or if it does, he's going to get injured a lot playing like that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this on the live show, and we'll repeat ourselves. I think a couple of things that are intriguing about this are the Cliff Kingsbury offense. We'll talk about that in a second. But your idea of Jayden Daniels, how well does he protect himself? I say it a lot. Playing style matters for quarterbacks, not just size and frame. So you have a guy like Anthony Richardson who looks like Josh Allen. And look, so Josh Allen plays like a maniac and gets away with it, right? For whatever reason, not everybody can do that, right? So Anthony Richardson has this similar, like, hey, I'm going to drop my shoulder. I'm going to take some hits. So it doesn't matter that he's that big. It's affected him. He's had a lot of injuries. Michael Vick had a tough time sliding, took big hits. Or RG3 took big hits. I think overall Lamar Jackson has been excellent at protecting himself. Now, I know he got injured a couple years ago. They were kind of late in the play. I don't know. They were kind of freaky. So it's not like Lamar Jackson never gets hurt. But Jayden Daniels plays a little wild. Yeah. Takes a lot of big hits. He's on the slender side as well. So, yeah, he's got to be careful and protect himself better.
Yeah, and if you look, Washington's offensive line right now is Cornelius Lucas at left tackle, Nick Allegretti at left guard, Tyler Biadasz at center, Sam Cosmi at right guard, and Andrew Wiley at right tackle. That's a bottom third offensive line in the NFL. Now you're expecting to protect this rookie that has a tendency to put himself in harm's way anyway. It's not a great recipe immediately. You're looking at the sort of landing spot of some of these quarterbacks now. You like what the Bears have put in front of Caleb Williams. Minnesota, we like the landing spot of as general terms. Washington's has some work to do.
It's a good storyline, right? Before the draft, we talked about, or a lot of people talked about, Washington having 2 picks early in the second, and how there's supposed to be this overrun of offensive tackles who land in the second round.
Right.
Well, that hasn't happened because 8 offensive tackles went in the first, or 7 went in the first, like pure offensive tackles went in the first. Can they get a Patrick Paul, Roger Rosengarten? Those guys are still, like, there are potential starters still available, but that's something to keep an eye on for round 2 for Washington, just right off the bat. The other part is I like, him throwing outside. Jayden Daniels throwing outside the numbers. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. That seems like a good fit.
Yeah.
In Kingsbury system.
No, I mean the Washington do have receivers. That's one thing in their favor, but that offensive line is a bit of a concern. And then the other thing is, you mentioned the Cliff Kingsbury offense. One of the biggest criticisms of it late in the Arizona sort of time was, remember, they had DeAndre Hopkins, and they didn't move him around anywhere. They just said, you're playing left wide receiver every snap, and that's how we think the biggest edge in this system is. Are we going to see that in Washington, or have we evolved to meet most other teams and most other offenses in terms of we're going to move our receivers around and find an edge in the motion and in the change of alignment and get them more favorable matchups?
All right, we got Drake Maye going number 3 overall, UNC quarterback to the New England Patriots. The rumors here were that New England were going to take Drake Maye, but they were still listening to offers. And supposedly rumors coming from the Giants and maybe the Vikings. A lot of smoke around the Vikings making the move. I'm assuming that was true. Let's assume that was true.
Yeah.
But New England decided, hey, it's better to take our guy and figure out the rest after.
Right. Next few days, we'll have a lot of sort of stories, behind the scenes. This is how it went down. This is what was going on, et cetera, et cetera. For now, we're just kind of guessing. My guess is that when this pick came, this was the player that was relevant to, I think, both Minnesota. I think Minnesota wanted Drake Maye, and I think Drake Maye was the player that New England was most comfortable taking. And when this pick came, I think they were in a sort of standoff, right, where the Vikings were saying, we'll trade up to get him. The Patriots are saying, well, it's going to cost you probably 3 first-round picks, and the Vikings just weren't willing to do that deal. And I think, first and foremost, that's probably the correct move. Like, it's just too much for any quarterback, let alone, whatever Drake Maye, you can say he might be the best, the second best quarterback in this draft or whatever, but I just think generally that's such a steep asking price for any quarterback that's still unproven. It's probably too much to go for. And then it makes even more sense when you see what Minnesota was able to do later on in terms of being patient and drawing that line in the sand and not being too desperate.
I'm so fascinated by watching Drake Maye's development, right? Usually when again, I thought like Justin Fields was going to go higher than he did, but the NFL didn't like his processing, held the ball too long at Ohio State. The offense maybe didn't translate. He had those great receivers. The reasons for the drop kind of made, but it's the mechanics. It's the throwing motion and the footwork. Where I think historically a lot of the NFL is like, man, I'll coach that up. Give me that guy. Give me the ball of clay. I'll make it work. And I'm a little surprised at how many people had soured on Maye. Now, I don't think they soured on him enough.
Right.
Still went at 3.
Yeah.
Right? He was still probably in consideration at 2 at some point. But I'm just fascinated by that development because I thought he was going to be a slam dunk 2 for a while before Jayden Daniels did emerge and became a top-notch prospect.
Yeah, obviously, given that he went at 3, given that it sounds like the Vikings were definitely interested in trading for him, it doesn't seem like the narrative around his negatives was actually as strong maybe as it sounded like it was. And I do think there's a fair argument to be made that Jayden Daniels was the second quarterback in this draft. My coin flip would have ended towards Drake Maye, but I think Jayden Daniels is perfectly justifiable as a second QB. But then the interesting thing for New England is they do decide to go QB, not trade down, not get the draft haul. Maybe the haul wasn't big enough, but this is another one of those situations where you look at the environment and you say, all right, we like Chicago, we like Minnesota, maybe even Denver. The Patriots have work to do to put an offense around Drake Maye.
Yeah, so this is for me, this is more of like let's reset expectations rather than saying this was the wrong move. Fine with this move. Take Drake Maye.
Yeah.
But you chose quarterback over build the infrastructure. And just a reminder, this was the infrastructure that got Bill Belichick fired, that ran Mac Jones out of town, and that brought the story that, oh man, the Patriots just didn't do well by Mac because he looked so good as a rookie, and then things fell apart. You just couldn't make good decisions for Mac Jones. It's a near identical group of pass catchers and near identical offensive line, except you actually lost a starter in Trent Brown.
Right.
And you have a left tackle, massive hole. And as we just mentioned, the tackles have come off the board.
Their starting tackle tandem is Connor McDermott and Chuks Okorafor. That's
Unless they kick Onwenu out. But
they've basically said they're settling him in at guard, having finally jerked him around for most of his career.
So to me, I mean, Okorafor has started in the NFL, but to me, he's a backup. You need 2 starting tackles in New England to be happy. So look, it doesn't mean the work's over.
Right.
It just means Drake Maye has been dropped into this situation right now, the one that got Mac Jones and Bill Belichick run out of town.
And like every receiver position feels like they're a number 2 at that position. Like Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton, Kendrick Bourne, Keyshawn Butte, Demario Douglas, KJ Osborne. This is a rough group of pass catchers for the 6th or 7th year in a row. Okay, it's a great receiver class, but again, the Patriots now have work to do to get a team around this quarterback that they just drafted.
So after all the rumors and everything that we were hearing, movement, we got 3 picks, no trades, and chalk continued. At least in pick 4. I don't know about pick 5,
right?
But the Chargers stayed. But in pick 4, Arizona Cardinals take Marvin Harrison Jr. And, there's your playmaker for Kyler Murray. Again, I think the debates in the draft rooms leading up were, do we take these blue-chip prospects or do we trade down for a haul? And it's interesting to me that Arizona and the Chargers both chose that. I assume that they had decent offers on the table.
Well, this is the thing.
Or did they?
I think that the haul that we've been talking, like every time you put one of these trades out there in a mock draft, right? Generally speaking, we kind of said this, to ourselves, like off air at times. Like, how come the PFF mock draft sim accepts some of these trades that feels like the compensation is too low? You're like, well, because they're not. You don't necessarily offer that amount. It's not happening. Like, it doesn't look like a team was willing to offer the kind of haul that fans were wanting for those picks. Right. And apparently teams were wanting for those picks. So whether or not Minnesota was ever really interested in trading to all of these spots in the middle, it sounds like they were making a run at number 3. Once Drake Maye was off the board, who knows if they even picked up the phone again between that and when they eventually went up for JJ McCarthy. But if they did, evidently they weren't willing to offer the kind of deal that would have made Arizona pass on Marvin Harrison or would have made the Chargers move out of that spot. So I'm not sure these trade hauls that we've been talking about were ever really on the table, at least not to the degree that would make the teams do it.
So Arizona takes Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yep.
And this doesn't mean that the NFL as a whole ranked him above Malik Nabers, but we talked a lot about that and heard a lot about teams having Malik Nabers over Marvin Harrison Jr. I believe that was true. But in the end, the guy that we expected to be the best non-quarterback in this draft goes number 4 overall and is the first non-QB off the board.
Yep. And I think that's correct. I mean, I think, again, we can talk about the potential and how good Malik Nabers is and what he can be in the NFL without tearing down Marvin Harrison Jr. I think some of the comments that came out about Harrison were silly. Like, it's stuff that's clearly disprovable from his tape, Yeah. I don't ever see him run by people. I mean, dude, it's all over his tape. What are you watching? I don't know what to say to you if that's your comment. Like, it's there. Look, Marvin Harrison Jr., we're a month or 2 away from talking about him as like the best wide receiver prospect since Calvin Johnson. Nothing changed. He's still that guy. He just didn't run a 40 for you. So,
And he's got a chance to be the high volume guy. Michael Wilson had a really nice rookie season last year, but I don't think Michael Wilson's taken targets away from Marvin Harrison Jr. He has a chance to hit the ground running. And
I think they can complement each other.
Oh, yeah, they'll be fine. I'm just saying, like, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the clear one right off the bat for Arizona. So now the Chargers up on the clock at 5. Similar. We were theorizing. Is this, somebody going to get JJ McCarthy? Somebody going to trade up? No. Chargers are going to make the pick. Then they've got maybe the worst receiver depth chart in the entire NFL. Malik Nabers is on the board. However, Jim Harbaugh told the truth at the owners' meetings. Talked about the offensive line. It's the position group.
Well, tell the truth a bit, JJ McCarthy was on the board.
He did have JJ McCarthy on the board as well. So he lied. I mean, if he thought he was the best player in the draft, you can't say we went BPA. You can't say we took the best player.
No.
We took the second best player, in our opinion, Joe Alt, behind JJ McCarthy. But Harbaugh told the truth in this sense. He said, hey, the offensive line, that's the position group that makes the entire team better, makes every other position group better. They go Joe Alt, the best tackle prospect in the draft at number 5.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. We were having this conversation on the draft show that, everyone talks about Harbaugh and wanting to establish the run and the offensive line, and how the last offense he had in San Francisco, there was 3 first-round picks on that. All of them, though, were there before Harbaugh arrived. He didn't draft those guys in the first round. In fact, the highest pick he spent on an offensive lineman during the time in San Francisco, not like he was, GM or whatever, but the highest pick spent on an offensive lineman during the years Harbaugh was in San Francisco was a 3rd rounder, and then a couple, I think, in the 4th, and everything else was, 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever. They didn't do this in San Francisco when he was there, and yet the first pick he makes here is going and getting top tier, the top tackle on the consensus board, and a guy to go in there and presumably play right tackle where Trey Pipkins was okay at best.
So Alt and Rashawn Slater, I think, immediately give you the potential for one of the better tackle duos in the NFL. Remember, a lot of tackles take time to develop. They don't all hit the ground running. I think Alt is closer to the guys that you would expect to have a smoother transition. But look, they're building the line, and now we got to see what the Chargers are going to do as far as receiver goes. Because they have, even if they're going to run the ball more, even if it's going to be a Harbaugh, driven offense where it's the run game and Greg Roman and it's the run game, man, they got some work to do now at receiver.
But a lot of teams have left themselves in that position. I think we sort of speculated quite a bit that this could happen. It's such a loaded receiver depth chart, draft rather, that there are going to be teams that wait until the 2nd or 3rd round, because you can get, there are guys that are going to be available in the 3rd round. I think they can come in and start immediately. They've
picked 37, so there's definitely going to be a receiver. I'm not saying you always have to take the need there, but if the Chargers double, triple up at the position, would not be surprised.
I mentioned that the sort of the fallout rumors are going to start flying. I don't even see where this is coming from.
Is this Kirk Cousins?
No, the Chargers apparently received trade calls about Justin Herbert from the Patriots and Vikings.
Oh, I did see that somewhere scroll across the timeline. That was, somebody they sent it. That was but it was like a quick no.
Sure,
or something. Yeah. I mean, those stories are interesting, but they're not. Because it's not like the Chargers weren't talking trade. It's just a team was like, would you trade Justin Herbert? No.
That stuff you're saying about JJ McCarthy, was that real? Because we can facilitate something.
Overheard you say something about JJ McCarthy being the best player in the draft. Do you really believe that?
The cap hit that they would have had to take for trading him, even if they wanted to, is astronomical. So it was never really.
They're also not stupid. Justin Herbert's good.
Sure.
So,
but even if they wanted to, it would have been difficult.
Malik Nabers at 6 to the New York Giants. Another place. The Giants fans were right. They assured us they're not taking offensive line. They're not doing that. They're getting the playmaker. They're getting a receiver here, and it's Nabers, who is just a big guy that can run fast and create big plays.
Yeah, I mean. Again, there's a very real conversation about whether he's better than Marvin Harrison. He's certainly, I think, more explosive, certainly in shorter areas. His run after the catch is sick. He's a great receiver. And again, my only concern with him has always been that shoulder shrug release thing, which is something they teach at LSU. You fix that at the NFL level, the dude should be a superstar right away.
So when you look at what the Giants have done this offseason, I think if I told you before the offseason, hey, they're going to do a little creep back toward average free agency spend on the offensive line, which includes Jermaine Illuminor coming in probably to compete at right tackle or take Evan Neal's job at right tackle. John Runyon, you might say, oh, okay, maybe he had a 56th grade last year. I don't think he's the best of the creep back toward average offensive line options. You're hoping for some development from John Michael Schmitz, last year's second-round center, who really struggled as a rookie. Andrew Thomas, one of the better left tackles in the league. Mm-hmm. It's got that creep back toward average potential.
Sure.
It's got that potential. I don't think it's completely there yet, the Giants' offensive line. But this gives you a pretty intriguing receiver group, with Nabers now as the one, in the speed of Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt, some shiftiness of Wan'Dale Robinson. It's intriguing at least, but it's the best receiver Daniel Jones has had.
Yeah, absolutely.
By a mile, right?
And also, you don't necessarily have to fill all those spots in, we talked about Washington and New England having work to do to put an offense around their quarterbacks that they just drafted. The Giants can fill some of those spots or add some competition in terms of veteran free agents. There's still some guys out there on the open market that could come in and start for a year and be okay, right? Guys like Greg Van Roten is a free agent, I think, still as a guard, right? Greg Van Roten could come in and start for you if you needed it to, right? There's some tackles out there that could come in and do it if you need it. Like, they could still attack that offensive line a little bit without necessarily needing to do it in the draft.
All right, they put the Titans up on the clock at 7. I think we'd always said, hey, Joe Alt would be the perfect pick there. They still go tackle, and it's JC Latham. Now, Alt plays left tackle. Latham played right tackle. We talk all the time, hey, you could flip sides and the whole thing.
Right.
But the NFL has a better history of taking left tackles and moving them to the right because the guy that played left tackle in college is probably the better athlete. It's just how they put those guys.
There's still legacy to that. Like, the best
Right.
player tends to be on the left side, so he's usually the better player.
Right. So as I always say, the left and right tackle are of equal value, but you're still usually putting the best athlete on the left side, so they're more versatile. You can move them around. I'm assuming JC Latham's coming in and playing right tackle here for the Titans. They still have a left tackle need, but hey, we're getting a little bit better on that O-line.
Yeah, so this begs the obvious question. Do you think that JC Latham, because he was a right tackle, was the top guy on their board, or is he just the next best option once Joe Alt is gone?
Next best option. Now, it's not – I don't think this was like necessarily a reach relative to other boards and everything. I believe that the Titans probably had him as a top 7 player in the draft, right? I don't think they just reached for need necessarily. A lot of people liked Latham. There was a lot of rumors around Latham going 5 to the Chargers.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was valid or if that was just trying to assume the big mauling right tackle to fit in. But a lot of people did like Latham. Chris Sims has him as his top tackle. I think he stays at tackle. And I just would keep him on the right side, right?
Sure.
Jedrick Wills was a guy a couple years ago, right tackle in college from Bama, moved to the left side, didn't do great. We don't have a great history of that. So
No, absolutely. It's interesting. I went back and watched his tape a bit more after, Chris talked him up when he was on our show, specifically said sort of watch the end of his tape as opposed to the start, and you see some better footwork. I think there's some truth to that. He's an interesting player because he doesn't pass block the way he run blocks. Like, his run blocking is all about punishing, road grading, power, and yet as a pass blocker, he almost tries to absorb contact more than punishes people. Like, you would expect him to use those long arms and deliver a punch and do that sort of active pass protection stuff where he's trying to physically dominate a guy, whereas actually he allows a guy into his body a lot more than you would expect and tries to sort of eat the inertia and kill it.
he's patient with his hands.
There you go.
I think that was one of my notes. I had it with somebody.
But he's also really strong. He's got a bit of that DeJuan Jones thing to him where he's so strong that, like,
Patient with hands was a note.
There you go, see? That it can get him out of some not ideal spots, you know what I mean? Like, he can be, either a guy can be into his pads or he can be not in a great position, but he's able to get an arm on the guy, and he's just so strong that it's able to kill the momentum.
Yeah, so Latham, again, what I know people get sick of me saying Peter Skoronski could play left tackle. I mentioned it on the live show. I won't repeat everything that I said here. Left tackle still a spot for the Titans to figure out. Maybe Skoronski could kick out to left tackle, but I think Latham's going to stay at right tackle. They also have Nicolas Petit-Friere over there. So Latham comes in. And look, they're building a pretty good, we'll talk about it on the recap show. We'll go team by team after the draft. It's a pretty good group of players around Will Levis now. They did need offensive line help. They got that. DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Treylon Burks. I like that.
Yeah, and by the way, so there's a few of these receivers that are unusual skill sets and don't necessarily get put in a great position to succeed. Treylon Burks is one of them, where if you watch what he was in college, he was just a gimmick, right? And they did everything possible to get the ball in his hands. He wasn't a conventional wide receiver. And then Tennessee, having traded away A.J. Brown, needed him to be a conventional wide receiver basically from the get-go and said, hey, you're now A.J. Brown. Good luck with that. And it was a disaster. Now, with Nuke Hopkins on board and Calvin Ridley now on board and even Nick Westbrook-Akina still there, Burks can be a legitimate, go back to doing what you were. Be a gimmick. Be a slot guy who can take jet sweeps, who can do all those kind of things. We'll just get the ball in your hands and just be a playmaker. He can go back to being that, where he was legitimately good at doing that in college.
Yeah, and between now and the start of the season, I'm going to say it 100 times, year 2 of Will Levis, putting him in much better position to succeed with some playmakers and hopefully a better offensive line, maybe some work to do there still, but get to see what he is. And if he's not the guy, you potentially move on after the season. All right, biggest curveball of the draft, the biggest surprise.
Yes.
It's pick 8. By the way, this is 7 offensive players selected so far. We got to 14 straight offensive players.
Which means we lost bets.
We lost some bets. We got to review some of those because some of them we've already lost. We've already got some PFF pluses to hand out. We had 2 predictions. One that was 10 offensive players in a row would go. Which didn't happen.
Right.
14 did.
Yeah. I mean, well, so Atlanta was the pick, though, right? We were like, it basically boils down to, does Atlanta go defense? Because if they don't, we could get a run. I mean, we'll go beyond the top 10 and who knows how much further.
So Atlanta goes Michael Penix Jr.,
yes,
the QB out of Washington.
So this is obviously the biggest surprise in the first round. I think it's also the most interesting pick in the first round, and it's one of the most interesting draft picks that's been made in years.
I mean, really in history. So what's the genesis of this?
So there's a few different aspects to it, right? Number one, it is up there, looking for any kind of comparables, right? Jordan Love, a first-round quarterback when you already had Aaron Rodgers reaching the end of his career. Even Rodgers himself, I guess, at that point. But you're the one you always bring up of Troy Aikman, and then the following year's supplemental draft, they grab a guy, right?
Steve Walsh with the 4th overall pick.
So it's somewhere in that ballpark in terms of completely unexpected left field, high investment in a quarterback to succeed the guy that is clearly entrenched as a starter. And in Kirk Cousins' case, just got there. Like, he's 5 minutes in the building and they're drafting his replacement. Now, because he's 5 minutes in the building, they are tied to him for a couple of years minimum, right? So now you are drafting this guy in the top 10 who is now QB 4 off the board, knowing that you're going to sit him for at least 2 years and maybe longer than that if if Cousins balls out and he ends up sitting even longer, like a Jordan Love type of deal. It is fascinating.
So yeah, there are really no comparables to this because the way QBs work, it's you either have one or you don't. There's probably 10 teams that really feel good about their quarterback situation, and the Falcons just became one of them with Cousins.
Yeah.
Right on the cutoff, the Falcons are one of them. If Geno Smith's Seahawks or Baker Mayfield's Bucks or even Jared Goff's Lions, who just went to the NFC Championship, if they drafted a quarterback, everybody's like, yeah, I kind of get it, right? Even though like the Lions are close to a Super Bowl, maybe you could have added pieces, but I kind of get it. The Falcons, it's such a shock because they just paid Kirk Cousins, as you said, and he's going to be the guy. So Terry Fontenot, the GM, when he comes to the podium, and he's already been to the podium probably, I don't know what he said yet, legitimately, we took best player available. And look, I may have said cryptically over the last few weeks, there are some teams that really like Michael Penix Jr. and that would take him in the top 10 or take him high. It's the Falcons.
Yeah.
That really like Michael Penix Jr. And so we talk a lot analytically about maybe teams should think differently about the quarterback position. This is going to be a fascinating test. The difference between the Jordan Love thing, though, they were picking late in the 20s.
Yeah.
And it's the late 20s. This is, you could have had your defensive player of your choice.
Oh, it's much more, yeah.
This is the 3 QBs were already off the board. You've got your 5th best non-quarterback versus taking Michael Penix Jr. That was the debate, and the Falcons were bold by taking Michael Penix.
That's what I'm saying. It's not, I mean, these are vague comps. They're not like for like because it's the number 8 overall pick instead of a pick in the 20s, which albeit you need to trade up to get there, but still, it's a lot less you're giving up. A point I've been trying to make for a long time, I don't know how well I've been conveying it, is we tend to think of quarterbacks in the draft in terms of the consensus, right? Like the NFL ranks these quarterbacks. Caleb Williams 1, Jayden Daniels 2, Drake Maye 3, and then it's Michael Penix 4. So the narrative becomes Atlanta drafted QB 5 or 6 in the top 10, and that's a ridiculous pick. They already have Kirk Cousins. But each individual team is not going to see that the same way, right? And Michael Penix Jr. is going to rank higher than that on certain boards. Clearly, Atlanta ranked him higher than QB 5, right? Because they drafted him above JJ McCarthy. They probably had him ranked even higher than that to draft him with a top 10 pick when you already had Kirk Cousins, right? You have to sort of factor in. Now, you can say putting that much stock in your own ability to be that different from the consensus board is in itself a questionable move. But the point you have to sort of recognize is that they didn't make this move for QB 5 or 6. They made this move for what they believe is something better than that, maybe QB 2, maybe QB 3 in this draft. And for them, that was like too good a value to turn down. And then the other element is, we said for half the year, like maybe the Packers way is just the way you should do it, right? Instead of drafting the quarterback when you need him, draft him 2 years before that, sit him for 2 years, develop him, and then put him out there. Because it's worked with Aaron Rodgers, it's worked with Jordan Love, and even if Jordan Love looked a little bit rough in the first few weeks, his development process accelerated itself over the course of a season. He looks amazing. So if there's actually a validity to that any quarterback his chances of success improve dramatically with like 2 years sitting on the sideline, then it doesn't matter necessarily that you're burning 2 years of his rookie deal, because theoretically you're getting a guy who's able to come in and play exactly at that level.
I'm so intrigued by it. And look, I know we have connections to the organization and everything, but I'm gonna explain why this could work. And it goes back to the Love thing. I didn't love Jordan Love as a prospect.
Same.
And I thought that the Packers were on the verge. I mean, they needed playmakers for Aaron Rodgers. At the time, they needed a complement to Devontae Adams. And they had the number 1 seed the next 2 years and lost in the playoffs. I do believe that the Jordan Love pick may have hindered, it hurt their Super Bowl chances, at least by whatever other player they could have had, right? But I said, hey, I don't think you should ever, I don't know that you could criticize a quarterback pick, because it's a whole different position. It's a whole different animal. The payout of hitting on a quarterback,
it's a whole different economy.
It hits different. It just hits different. It's completely different. So here's what could happen. Here are the options. One other thing I want to say. When people didn't like the Jalen Hurts pick for the Eagles, they already had Carson Wentz. They didn't want to replace Carson Wentz. He was the starter next year, and he kind of fell apart.
Right.
And then they traded him. And Jalen Hurts stepped in, and the Eagles almost won a Super Bowl. Only because they drafted Jalen Hurts, which is a process pick. I'm going to assume this is a process pick. They loved Penix.
Sure.
They took him at 8. That's high. But here's what could happen. Cousins has 2 years left on his deal. He's still the guy. He's hurt. He's offended. He didn't know about this. Fine. You got 2 years of Kirk Cousins, and you still got good guys to throw to. After that, Penix could take over. I don't know if there's a specific plan. They're just getting him in the building, right? And if he's a stud, then you're feeling great about yourself. There's also a chance they could trade him if they needed to, right? Plays great in the preseason, they trade him. The other part, backup quarterbacks are getting a little bit more expensive these days.
Sure.
So at worst, he's a backup. It's an expensive backup because you're using pick 8.
Yeah.
But here's the thing to remember. The payout for a quarterback is so different than the payout from an edge defender, right? Whatever it might be. You're giving up a starter at another position.
Yeah.
You're giving up a legitimate good player, but the payout for the quarterback is like 5 times, 10 times what that starter could be. And that's where you're just taking that chance and saying, okay, long-term plan, he could be our guy in 3 or 4 years. We're willing to give up a starter for 3 or 4 years for that massive potential payout.
We are willing to give up a day one impact player, potentially. Potentially. We don't know that it would be. You might have missed on the pick. You might have drafted an absolute turkey, right? So you're willing to give up the potential for a day one starter, for the potential of a seamless transition at the most important position in the game in a couple of years' time. One thing I've seen come up repeatedly that I would push back on significantly, people keep saying Michael Penix Jr. is too old to be the sit guy, right, to sit behind him. Michael Penix Jr. is 23 years old now, right? He'll be 24 years old at the start of this season, which means in 2 years' time, if and when he takes over, he'll be just turned 26 years old, which is slightly older than Jordan Love this year, and gives you 10 years of runway of him as a starting quarterback.
The age thing is so overblown because people just use it the wrong way. I think the right way to use it is if you're just looking at guys' production and you say he's old for his level,
yes,
maybe you shouldn't weigh the production the same way. In other words, this should work against, say, a Jayden Daniels. But it's not going to work against a guy and be like, man, you're only going to have him for – the other way to use it against somebody is if you draft a former minor league player and he's 28 or 29 and it's Brandon Weeden, maybe that's not going to work.
It's like looking at a kid playing out of his grade level, right, in sports. The reason you do that is not – it has nothing to do with how long he can play the game at that age. It's the fact that he's playing kids that are younger than him, right? So, of course, he's going to look better than that because he's older than those guys. So, Michael Penix Jr., like the fact that he's going to be 24 this year is completely irrelevant to this conversation.
And I see some of the stuff in the chat, like, Dallas Turner, whoever. Like, the value of one non-quarterback at most positions is negligible. It's negligible. Now, we're going to break down all these picks and say, this is a great pick. This is putting the team on the right track. But the reality is you need 15 of those guys, 20 of those guys. It's just one player. And so that's the trade-off here for one potential massive difference maker in a quarterback.
And this is where the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers example is actually a really good case study in it, right? Because you've made the point, and you may be right, it's a completely unknowable counterfactual, right? But did Green Bay leave a Super Bowl on the table by not drafting a first-round wide receiver and instead picking Jordan Love for the future, right? Could be. Who knows? Don't know. Either way, they didn't win one. But the point being, if Jordan Love is the guy that he looked last year and they've secured the next 10, 15 years of the franchise by doing that, it might be worth the one, even if they left a Super Bowl on the table, it might be worth it. If they win 2 under Jordan Love because he's one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the next, 10, 15 years, that's worth it.
Yeah, it's just it's another intriguing data point. And it's also, I thought Trevor made a really good point on the show. He said this is Arthur Blank too. Look, I know in the building they loved Penix. That's why they made the move, right? Arthur Blank was not be like, man, this Penix guy's great. We're going to draft him. But Trevor's point was like Arthur Blank went through Desmond Ridder last year. And remember, Desmond Ridder was like a pretty good, showed some stuff for a third rounder. And then they didn't go get the next guy. They didn't go get Lamar Jackson. They didn't go get a replacement. They said, go start. And it was one of the worst quarterback situations in the league. It may have lost 3 or 4 games because of him. So a lot of time on Michael Penix, but
it's worth it. I mean, But
it was Trevor was basically saying Arthur Blank saying never again. And he's got to sign off on this. The owner's got to sign. And he signed off and said, you know what? We paid Kirk a lot, and we're going to spend 8 on a QB. This might take care of the quarterback situation for the next 15 years.
Yeah, if Atlanta had drafted if they drafted Spencer Rattler in the 3rd round, right, or if they drafted Michael Penix Jr. in the 2nd round, nobody would have batted an eyelid. It's like Kirk Cousins is 35 years old coming off an Achilles injury. Of course it makes sense to have some kind of contingency behind him or some kind of succession plan in place. The only thing that makes it wild is the fact that they spent the 8th overall pick on him, which is reasonably unprecedented, if not completely unprecedented, but also has to be tied in to how they ranked the quarterbacks, right? Michael Penix may have been like 32 overall or whatever he ended up being on the consensus board. They did not rank him there. Like, that's the piece of information that you have to bear in mind.
I can't wait to see what they do with the rest of the draft. We'll break it all down in the NFC South review later in the week. Bears are up at number 9. They take Rome Odunze from Washington, wide receiver. This was a common pick, and, Bears fans got to be feeling pretty good. Only 2 picks left for Bears in this draft, but one of them was Keenan Allen. It's fine.
Yep.
They got to feel pretty good about this combination. Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze.
Absolutely. I mean, Bears fans were sort of saying it was quite a common pre-draft pick, and you got some pushback sometimes. They're like, we've got DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. We don't need another receiver. Cole Kmet, the tight ends. It's like, well, you don't need him, but, Keenan Allen is probably not a long-term solution at his age, and you can never have too many high-end impact receivers. So Justin Fields was set up institutionally to fail by this team. They are declaratively not making the same mistake again. They are going to give Caleb Williams every possible opportunity to be good, and Rome Odunze, I think he gets lost in the shuffle a bit this year because Marvin Harrison is potentially generational, because Malik Nabers is seen as somebody that could be even better than that by some people. Rome Odunze in most drafts would be the number 1 wide receiver off the board, right? He is that good. And just because the other 2 guys are coming out in the same year, he's getting sort of ignored. But that dude is obviously he's a top 10 talent. He went in the top 10. He's a really good receiver.
So we've got a little bit of Schefter tweeted this, a little recap of the Bears-Panthers trade from last year and the results.
Yep.
It's still not done, by the way. But as of right now, and fully admit I'm a I'm okay with trading up for your QB guy. Like, Panthers process-wise was fine, but boy, does this look good for the Bears. In that trade with the Panthers, they received DJ Moore, last year's first rounder, which was Darnell Wright, last year's second rounder, which was Tyreek Stevenson, the corner, this year's first rounder, which becomes Caleb Williams, and they still have next year's second round pick. Panthers receive number 1 pick last year, Bryce Young.
Bryce Young. Yeah. When you lay it out like that, it doesn't feel great for Carolina.
It doesn't feel great. But that's what's interesting about the Patriots' decision at 3. Should they get that type of haul over time and have it work out for them versus just taking one quarterback, right? That's the power of a top 5 pick.
Well, this is like GMs and owners now needs to be sort of looked at as, okay, if your pitch to me is we're going to go get the quarterback, the resulting question needs to be at the expense of what? Like, what does that leave the situation around the quarterback as being? Because Carolina went and got Bryce Young, but it cost them too much. They lost his only decent wide receiver in Carolina, and then the offensive line was a mess as well, and the dude just had no shot last year.
Man, we've been going for a while here. I thought this was going to be a 2-hour show.
The Penix thing was going to take some time. We'll get through. It'll be faster. Don't worry.
Last thing I want to say about this, last year at this time, we thought maybe it'd be Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. That was like the pipe dream. Caleb Williams
got pretty close.
And Rome Odunze is a really good scenario. He's throwing to Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore,
right,
Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett. It's a nice group.
Yeah, I mean, for a while,
Swift.
It looked like that Chicago might end up with the first and second overall picks of the draft, right, because of the picks that they had. They won enough games to take themselves this deep and still ended up with a guy who, as we said, in most years would be the first wide receiver off the board. To come out of this draft with those two guys, phenomenal.
All right, so all while this is happening, no trades have taken place. We were supposed to have all these trades, 4, 5,
right,
all these trades. No trades have taken place until pick 10. The Jets are on the clock at 10. The Vikings moved from just 11 to 10. And we were asking ourselves, the Vikings have to get a quarterback. They have to get somebody. Maybe they should trade for Kirk Cousins. If they didn't get JJ McCarthy.
He's probably asking for a trade right now.
But JJ McCarthy is the pick at 10. And, there were rumors that the Vikings wanted to get up to 4 to get JJ McCarthy. They definitely did want to get to 3 to get Drake Maye. They were trying to do that. And then it was like, well, can they get to 4 to get JJ? They wait. They only go from 11 to 10, still get JJ McCarthy from Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, this is one where hopefully there's a reporter embedded somewhere in Minnesota. Like, this is one of the stories we need to hear after the draft. What were they doing from picks number 3 all the way through to pick number 10 here? And then
Arizona, you want to trade? No.
Yeah, even
Chargers
later.
trade? No. Giants? No.
How did that go down? How hard were they chasing for Drake Maye? How much was it Drake Maye and then we're good for a while? We're not actually that interested. And then how much of the intervening picks were them being disciplined and waiting it out and playing chicken and not blinking versus how much were they on the phone constantly and just getting rebuffed by everybody and saying, no, we're not doing that trade. That, I think, is interesting. Like, from the outside, you can paint this in a way of this was an outstanding job of drawing a line in the sand, saying we have our value. We're not going to get caught up in a crazy bidding war. We're only going to pay value, and that's it. And then this was the deal. They jumped one spot up just to make sure they secured a quarterback over Denver or the Raiders if that was likely to happen.
Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the general manager for the Minnesota Vikings, 2 trades up in the first round. The analytics GM, the economic GM,
there
really.
You go.
But Kwesi does make 2 trades up, one for one slot, but the other one was very aggressive. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But JJ McCarthy, we said this a lot, the landing spot in Minnesota with Justin Jefferson, last year's first-round receiver Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson at tight end, a pretty good offensive line. JJ McCarthy probably lands in a comparable spot to Caleb Williams as far as talent goes and a really good place to succeed early on.
Yeah, as in terms of the situation.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so if you cut it off here, right, and you look at this in isolation so far for the Vikings, they didn't get Drake Maye. If we assume that was their primary target, they couldn't make a deal happen with New England. They weren't willing to give up what it would cost. And then, all of the mock drafts had them trading to 4, trading to 5, giving up 2 first-round picks, going to get JJ McCarthy. They didn't do that. They traded up one spot. It cost them very little to do it. And they still got JJ McCarthy and kept pick number 23 intact for a trade later on that they then use. So
Yeah.
from up to now, you would say that's a good job by the Vikings. They didn't get what was presumably their top target, but neither did they oversell and give everything up to go do it. They got the quarterback most people expected them to get anyway, and they kept their second first-round pick.
I'd have to see it all written out, but I do. You might be drawing the conclusion if you said the Vikings are going to give up X in this draft and come away with JJ McCarthy, their quarterback,
Right.
and Dallas Turner, a perceived top 10 player in this draft. You'd say yes, and you would assume that most of what they gave up was for the QB. It just happened to be for the edge rusher.
Right.
And so maybe at the end of the day, they came in saying, hey, we're willing to give all this up. And they did anyway, and they just did it for the different players, much like the Texans last year.
Yeah.
Gave up a lot and came away with their quarterback and their edge rusher from Alabama. Very similar, I think. But I still think it was maybe too aggressive for Dallas Turner. We'll talk about that in a little bit. New York Jets at 11, Olu Fashanu, the left tackle from Penn State. I like this pick for the Jets.
Like it a lot, yeah. I mean, I think that Fashanu, we've talked about him a lot. I think he has the potential to be the best tackle in this draft class. I think his footwork is phenomenal. I've actually comped his footwork ability to Tyron Smith, and now he goes to back up Tyron Smith in a role that means, number one, he can sit for presumably most of the year, but also he'll probably play some because Tyron Smith is always missing some time injured.
Yeah, a lot of these there's a lot of these tackles that kick into guard, and I don't think Fashanu's that type of guy. He's not a kick into guard to start his career type of guy, and he's on a team with locked-in starting tackles, Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses. So I think Fashanu does start as a backup. To your point, Morgan Moses is durable but getting older, and Tyron Smith is not so durable and old. He'll miss some time, but it's really good. I mean, it's for a team that feels like they should be all in for Aaron Rodgers, it's more of a long-term player. It's a long-term left tackle play. I think Fashanu has a chance to be a top 3 to 5 pass protector in the league. Just has a lot of work to do in the run game, and this gives him a time to maybe get a little bit stronger and improve there.
Yeah, I really, this is one of my favorite picks of the first round in terms of the fit, and I also think it kind of justified that. We'd questioned why was his draft stock slipping so much in the pre-draft process. It didn't really, right?
No, it didn't. No, it was fine. It was right where it needed to be. The other, we need to go back and think about what was passed up historically. Everybody had Brock Bowers going to the Jets.
Right.
People close to Joe Douglas said, nah, he's not going to take him. Not going to take a tight end. Joe Douglas he's mostly picked high-value positions, edges and corners, receivers, and in this case, a tackle. So they passed up Brock Bowers, which seemed like a great fit for Aaron Rodgers, but he goes a couple picks later. So then at pick 12, by the way, we're 11 picks in. It's all offensive players. There are 5 quarterbacks. It was a record. 4 quarterbacks in the top 8, 5 in the top 10, and another record, 6 quarterbacks now in the top 12. Bo Nix selected by the Denver Broncos at 12. I thought it was one of the biggest stories of the draft. What are the Broncos going to do with pick 12? Don't have a great spot to get one of the top 3 quarterbacks or 4 quarterbacks. Don't have a second-round pick. Sean Payton's the head coach. All this dead money on Russell Wilson, and they go and they draft Bo Nix at 12.
Yeah, so this is I don't have evidence in this, but this would be another interesting one to know how Denver ranked Bo Nix, right? Was this a product of, oh no, all the quarterbacks are gone, quick, who's the next one up? It's Bo Nix? Or this was a common connection pre-draft, right? Denver and Bo Nix. Like, there was a lot of speculation that Bo Nix would be the QB Sean Payton would love, right? Chris came to that conclusion as well. A lot of people made that connection of stylistically, this is the guy that Sean Payton would identify as the QB he would want anyway. So were they confident that they could just sit there at pick number 12 and get the guy that would be QB 2 or 3 on their board anyway? Or is this Christian Ponder, right? QBs were going, we just had to get the next guy. Don't know.
I mean, there's certainly not a world. I mean, I assume, let's say the Falcons and Penix, you said, hey, if they got him in the second round, it wouldn't be that crazy, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversations in buildings. I'm sure they had that conversation. Like, can we wait till the second? The Broncos couldn't have that conversation.
They don't have a second.
And Bo Nix always felt like there was always that connection to the Broncos, right? There was always that connection. Drew Brees type of quarterback, and he's mobile and moves around and the whole thing. gets rid of the ball quickly. I feel like they just knew they were going to take him at 12. And then it's like, we'll figure the other stuff later. We'll deal with not having a second-round pick later and build the rest of the roster because they got a lot of work to do from a roster building standpoint, a lot of turnover there in Denver. But Bo Nix is the guy. And, going into the Senior Bowl, I thought he would come out of there with more top 10 hype. He was a little uneven in his play. I thought Penix outplayed Bo Nix at the Senior Bowl, and I think a lot of the hype cooled. And I'll be honest, I did think him and Penix would end up dropping a little bit more. We've done other mocks, though, where we did have 6 quarterbacks go in the top 12, and it felt crazy. But it happened. This was it. It wasn't crazy. It was a reality.
Yeah, but my point being, again, I think for Atlanta, we're pretty confident that the Falcons had Michael Penix Jr. just ranked significantly higher than everybody else.
Was this QB 6 on the Broncos?
Yeah, or not everybody else, but a lot of people, most people. It's entirely possible because of the connection that everybody has been making, right? That Denver had Bo Nix similarly ranked. And actually, he's QB 6 off the board, but he might have been QB 2 or 3 on their draft board. And for them, this is just like phenomenal luck, right? The draft fell exactly the way we wanted it. All these terrible quarterbacks are flying off the board, and Bo Nix, our dude, falls right into our lap.
There were some serious Bo Nix believers. I mean, just a fascinating prospect.
Young Michael Renner, for one.
From Jay Cutler to Alex Smith, as I've said a few times.
Right.
The Auburn to Oregon differences are massive. He's very good at avoiding sacks, getting rid of the ball. Could be a nice fit for Sean Payton. But again, I think Denver, they need some playmakers. They need better offensive line. So some work to do in Denver. But Bo Nix, they get their guy to develop. Brock Bowers at 13.
Now, this is
the Raiders.
Yeah. Now, this is the one that fascinates me in terms of, okay, you can construct a fairly compelling argument that the Falcons and the Broncos and the Vikings actually took their quarterbacks according to their board, essentially, right? Didn't do anything crazy, just took the quarterbacks that they ranked really highly. Now Denver is the Raiders, for the second year in a row, is the team without a chair when the music stopped, right, in terms of quarterbacks. Last year, they end up with Tyree Wilson. This year, what was the thought process there? They're like, oh, no, there's literally no quarterbacks left. Like, if we want to take one, it's Spencer Rattler at 13 overall. That's not going to fly.
Yeah, you take the best player.
Right. So they just went, crap, what do we do? It's Brock Bowers. He's the only blue chip left.
They took the best player on their board. So it's funny because I'm a Brock Bowers fan. If the Jets took him at 10, I'd be like, wow, high five Jets, great job. But the Raiders take him at 13, and it's fine. Like I think he's a very good player, and I am a draft the best player type of guy. I don't care that you have Michael Mayer on the roster. That's fine.
I also think they coexist fine.
Absolutely.
They're not redundant skill sets.
They're not, and so let's think about the long-term play here. You still have Devontae Adams here. You still have Jacoby Myers. You have Michael Mayer. You have Brock Bowers. I do believe the Raiders. They lose the musical chairs game. They're left without a quarterback. It's Aiden O'Connell battling with Gardner Minshew. Doesn't feel great going into this year. As an I want Aiden O'Connell on my team type of guy. I just don't want him as QB1, right? I want him in there competing, and he still could develop. I want to develop him. I just don't want him as QB1. Could they go get Spencer Rattler later and throw him into the mix? Maybe. But I think the long-term play for the Raiders could work out pretty well because a year from now they're still looking for a quarterback and they might have some good playmakers for that guy. The part that doesn't feel as good is for the QB that has this uneven quarterback situation. It's like the one low positional value position in the first round. I like Brock Bowers. I think he's worth it. But everyone else is getting their receiver and their QB and their tackles and their corners and their edges, and you're getting the tight end. You know what I mean? That's where it doesn't feel good for like a rebuilding roster of the Raiders. And I love Brock Bowers, and I think he's going to be a very good player. And I think maybe a year from now, like free agent Dak Prescott might go to the Raiders because they got dudes to throw to. I don't know. But it's just an interesting pick amongst all these other high-value positions.
No, I think that's right. This, to me, though, is the only good thing for them is that it's a different regime than last year. Because if this was the same regime that had the music stopped twice and no quarterback at the end of it, 2 years in a row, you'd be like, this is ridiculous at this point. Like, go and make a move, go and find a guy.
Yeah. I mean, the difference with, Sean Payton's heading into year 2, And the Raiders are heading to year one of Antonio Pierce plus Tom Telesco. So are they able to, reset a little bit here?
But going back, I do think that, people were sort of saying, why would they take another tight end? They just drafted Michael Mayer. I do think that those are two complementary skill sets that can coexist well in the same offense, right? Michael Mayer is more of a traditional inline, blocker type of tight end that lines up attached to the line of scrimmage, whereas Brock Bowers can be your big slot, right? He can be the Dalton Kincaid in the offense. Dalton Kincaid and
Move
Dawson
tight
Knox.
end.
Yeah, like he can block, but Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox coexisted in the same offense, right? It was perfectly fine. You can use both of them in the same way, in different ways, rather. The Bills, I think, were able to smooth the transition of Dalton Kincaid into the NFL by saying, you know what? Don't worry about blocking, at least not right away, right? You're going to be big slot for us. You're essentially a wide receiver. We'll deal with blocking later on. So forget that part of it. I think the Raiders can do the same thing. Like Brock Bowers is a phenomenal receiving threat. We'll worry about blocking later on. For now, leave that to Mike. You concentrate on being our big slot, which is the sort of the hole in that offense from a receiving skill set.
Yeah.
Because they got rid of Hunter Renfrow, right? So they've got outside receivers, and now Brock Bowers can come in and be the big slot, and Michael Mayer can be the true inline tight end.
Yeah, and if he produces like that, the positional value thing, I think, becomes less relevant. You're not going to be overpaying him relative to other tight ends. And I'll just say this. Elite tight ends are absolutely worth it. Doesn't mean he's an elite tight end.
Right.
But he's got as good of a chance as any tight end that's come into the league, along with Kyle Pitts, probably in the last 10 years. So that's the Raiders at 13. So I don't want to sound like I soured on it. It's just for a team that doesn't feel great about their quarterback position, probably, they took the best player, though. Saints at 14. That was 13 straight offensive players. 14 straight now. Taliese Fuaga, the tackle from Oregon State, goes to the Saints. This is where all the teams started taking a little bit longer on the clock, and all the reports were trying to trade down. Because of the way this draft fell, I think teams were like, yeah, I could get my guy a little bit later. Saints were forced to pick, though. They take Fuaga, and if Ryan Ramczyk does end up having to retire, Fuaga probably steps right in at right tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. So they have Trevor Penning, who former first round left tackle, hasn't been good. James Hurst, is that official? He's retired?
He's still on our depth chart, I see. Is yours working? Mine stopped working.
It just came back.
Okay, good. He's still on our depth chart. I saw that on Nick Underhill, who covers the Saints for New Orleans football. I saw him
good source,
reacting to James Hurst's retirement the other day.
Yeah.
I did not look and confirm it. Not a great reporter, but that's.
But Nick Underhill's a pretty good source. So,
yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. Like, would you? Because at this point, Trevor Penning has not been good at left tackle. So do you almost kick him over to the other side and see if Fuaga play left tackle?
Yeah, he retires. Breaking news 1 day ago.
There you go.
James Hurst is retired.
Or do you just keep Fuaga at right tackle and hope Trevor Penning gets better?
I think you just hope for Penning. Again, to repeat, you can flip guys, but if you don't have to, don't do it.
Sure.
So, again, this is depending on Ramczyk. Like if Ramczyk is like, hey, I'm healthy, let's go, I'm putting Fuaga at left tackle and letting him compete with Penning for sure. And Penning he's a big dude, but he might be able to kick in and be a mauling guard.
I was interested how many people that I came across late in the process had Fuaga listed as a guard as opposed to a tackle. Like, to me, he's a kind of classic. I mean, he's a classic stereotypical right tackle in terms of he's got the touch of death when it comes to run blocking people, just smushes dudes. But he's also good enough, I think, as a pass blocker to hang there.
I think people project guys into guard if they're just shorter, not as long, or if they are maulers. That's why JC Latham had guard discussion. Fuaga is going to have guard discussion because he kills people.
But
guards do that.
Latham, number one, his body type looks more like a guard to me. Number two, his footwork I thought was a lot more plodding, which again is more guard-like. Whereas Fuaga's footwork is fine. Like, I don't see a reason necessarily why he needs to move inside. And his run blocking is absurd.
No, I like Fuaga. He was a model guy. He was a model. Is he down a little bit? He went down a touch, just under the 90th, but still
it was the final laminated version.
Final laminated.
Did you go the entire draft show without mentioning the model?
Yeah, it's more of a day 2 or 3 type of thing.
Oh, is it? I just feel like
I didn't mention it. I said I like most of the guys.
And we've gone 14 picks before you mentioned it here. I think we need to get some more model talk.
Yeah, Fuaga. Yeah, I like it for the Saints.
Yeah, I think it's a good pick for them. I mean, they desperately needed offensive line help. Honestly, almost at any spot along that offensive line. So, absolutely get one.
Pick 15, we finally have our first defensive player off the board. Laiatu Latu, the edge from UCLA, goes to the Colts at number 15 overall. I pledged to our viewers. I said, listen, if Latu falls to the middle of the first round, I will declare him the best pick in the draft. This is it.
Yeah, this feels like a victory lap thing. Not like Laiatu Latu is the first defender off the board, which is what we were saying should happen all the way along. He is the best defender in this draft. If you are comfortable with his medical, he's the guy.
I thought it was interesting because I love hearing Chris's draft takes for the first time, right? Because you just never know. Like, he just sometimes sees things completely differently than us.
Yeah.
And in his mock draft, he usually throws little nuggets in there from things he's heard. And he had Latu falling to 29 in his mock draft. And I was like, oh, no, he did this with DeJuan Jones last year. DeJuan Jones was supposed to be a fringe first rounder. And he's like, guys, he's going to drop. And he goes in the 4th. So I was worried about Latu dropping. And in this particular case, like, he kind of fell because I thought he could have been a top 10 player.
Right.
But he goes at 15. He's the first defensive player on the board, and the Colts get him.
Yeah, and so I was just – it's curious as well as a pick because the Indianapolis Colts are this famed hyper-athlete chasing team. You know, they're only interested in guys with an RAS, relative athletic score of 1 million, right? Now, he ends up with actually quite a good RAS, but it's largely because he didn't do much. So he didn't do enough things to drag down his RAS.
Yeah. I mean, when you say that, though, like, don't misconstrue things. I don't think they're looking at that number and making decisions off of it.
No, but they have a.
They're looking at the other stuff. They're saying, here's his 40 time, here's his 10, here's his cone, here's his shuttle.
Yeah, well,
and
okay.
They throw him into their own algorithm, and it's like.
Right, but the point being, they haven't taken a guy with an RAS lower than like 9 point whatever.
Yeah, they weigh athleticism high in their evaluations.
They are the most athleticism chasing team in the NFL, and they've taken a guy whose principal knock among a lot of people has been he's not a great athlete, right? That was the point I was trying to make, is that the team that covets athleticism the most has taken the guy whose athleticism was thought to be a weakness, but then, as PFF Gas pointed out, is actually a 99th percentile athlete on the field when it matters the most.
That's right. And that matches with his production, which is
off the charts good.
Which is very, very good. 2 years of dominant production from Latu. And I love this pick.
I really do, yeah. I mean, we said this on the show as well. I think it's important to understand just how good his grading and production is. It is better than Aiden Hutchinson. It is better than Will Anderson. It is somewhere between those guys and Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett. Like, that's the rare air he's in as a productive pass rusher. And it turns out on the field he's an amazing athlete as well. Ergo, if you're cool with his neck, the dude's a first-round pick and should be the best defender.
He's a blue.
There you go.
He's a blue. I like Latu. He goes in there, Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam. He'll get some reps right away and maybe be their best pass rusher right away. So I like that a lot for the Colts at 15.
And here's the defense run.
Yeah, the defense run. Seattle at pick 16. A lot of people had them pegged for their guard and center needs. They said, hey, we're not going to do that. They were right. They take the second defensive player off the board, Byron Murphy, the second, out of Texas.
Like the pick. Byron Murphy's a really good player, and he's versatile. And that now gives this, remember, new defense, new coach coming over from Baltimore. That now gives them a multiple versatile defensive lineman up front that can move around the defensive front, that can do multiple things. Like, Byron Murphy is a prototypical 3-tech size, right? Sort of 6 foot plus, 300 pounds-ish. You think of those guys as Aaron Donald, right? You think of those guys as quick, one-gap, penetrating pass rushers. But Byron Murphy is a dude that was playing nose tackle for a bunch of his snaps, that was defending the run really well, that was, keeping a 360-pound defensive tackle playing out wide because he can play inside and hold up. Like, he can do everything you want him to do on the defensive line and is constantly working. Like, Chris called him a high motor guy, but sometimes you get these guys that are high motor without a plan. He's high motor with a game plan, right? Like, he'll hit you with a move, and if that's not working, he'll transition to the next move And then if the hit comes in from the side, he'll use that to spin around and hit the other gap. Like, he's constantly coming towards the quarterback or the ball carrier.
I had some really similar takeaways. I wrote down wrestler-like leverage against double teams. Like, you see, sometimes when a guy plays basically out of position, like he shouldn't be playing nose tackle.
Right.
And you see that with edge rushers playing inside in college sometimes when they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about how they handle the run. And I'm watching Byron Murphy just scrapping and using his hands and fighting off double teams and still making plays. And I was just really impressed by that. And he's still young as a player, but really, really productive. And I think he can be an explosive pass rusher, a good run defender. I think he still has a lot of room to grow. In Seattle now, Leonard Williams, they just traded for. It's gonna feel uncomfortable with not having a second-round pick, but Leonard Williams is that guy. They just paid him a bunch of money. Jaron Reed there, Draymond Jones there over the last couple of years. They've all those second-round picks that they've spent on edges. When you piece it all together, the defensive line feels like it's coming back around for Seattle, and it's taken some time, I think, to have that type of impact up front for the Seahawks.
Yeah, and they're probably going to get that boost just by a new scheme coming in and all those kinds of things. Pete Carroll was a great defensive coach and a great coach, period, but he'd been there a long time, right? You've got to think that message probably lost some of its impact just through time.
Yeah. All right, let's go Jacksonville Jaguars. They were on the clock at pick 17. They trade down. Minnesota Vikings trade back up. And at pick 17, they're taking Dallas Turner out of Alabama. So the Vikings make the second trade up and the most aggressive trade up. One that we ran it through the PFF simulator, that the Jaguars win this trade 66% of the time. It was the most extreme one-sided trade that we saw in round one.
Yeah, and it was the one that didn't have anything coming back. Like maybe all of the other trades had some kind of collateral coming in the other direction to sort of even things out and at least making sure that you weren't losing a bunch of picks. Minnesota gives up number 23 to make this happen, a fifth-round pick this year, and then a third and a fourth next year. So they gave up 3 picks to move up 6 spots. That's a lot. Now, and none of those, like third, fourth, and fifth round, I mean, they're not inconsequential. Certainly a third and a fourth. That's a lot to make this move happen.
Yeah, there's a couple stories with this, right? We mentioned Jim Nagy saying, hey, this draft isn't as deep. We agree.
Yeah.
Rounds 4 through 7. If anything, maybe take your day 2, day 3 picks, trade them for next year, and the Jags do this. The Vikings don't. So the Vikings look like they're going to be a little depleted from a draft perspective next year. But I do wonder if they're sitting there, as I said earlier, and saying, hey, we thought we might use all this draft capital for JJ McCarthy. We just happened to use it for Dallas Turner. I think it's an aggressive move that is risky. I think trades up of this caliber are risky over time. Right? Again, it's not as risky as Will Anderson, I loved Will Anderson as a player. You're saying Dallas Turner's worth, plus next year's third and fourth, and that's a lot.
Yeah. So this is where it gets kind of fascinating because Dallas Turner was number 9 on the consensus board. His most typical landing spot, his average, draft position, I guess, is number 8 to Atlanta when we thought they were going to be the first defensive team. Instead, he slides, 10 more picks essentially and is there at 17 for Minnesota, and they jump up to get him. So if the Vikings had this board the same way as everybody else, they had Dallas Turner as a top 10 player in this draft and the best defensive player in the draft, right?
Yeah, and so again, even if he is, right? Let's say he is. To justify this, to make it way out in the balance sheet 3 years from now, 4 years from now, Dallas Turner has to be more valuable than the guy they would have gotten at 23, whoever that is, whoever they picked at 23, plus next year's third and fourth and whatever the pick swap is.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this was a good move because of how much they gave up. Like I think this was a mistake because of what it cost them to do. But I will say that this is one of sort of relative to the consensus board and the pre-draft projection of where we thought everybody was going to end up. This was a player that is sort of slipping and is 10 spots lower than we expected him to go, right? So if the Vikings are looking at this and saying, this is one of a couple of instances in this draft where I don't think they had any realistic chance of expecting that guy to be available when they were picking.
That's fair.
So if they're looking at this and saying, oh, wow, Dallas Turner, who we think is the best defensive player in this draft, is suddenly available, or is at least in reach, right? We can go get him, and okay, it's going to cost some. It's kind of so it's a bit like the Will Anderson pick, right? They looked at Will Anderson last year and said, "This dude is a blue chip player. He's the best defensive player in this draft. We can get him as well as the quarterback. And okay, it's going to cost us a first-round pick next year. It's worth it." And they made that move, and they've been kind of proven correct with it, right? This is a kind of equivalent idea where they're looking at this and saying, this guy is the best defensive player in the draft, and actually we can get him. We can get him as well as our quarterback. All right, it's going to cost us 3 more picks to make it happen, but we can come out of this draft with the franchise quarterback and the best defensive player in the draft, in theory. And all it's cost us is like a bunch of other mid-round picks.
It's a really intriguing pick, and maybe we'll spend more time on it in the recap show. But really quick, we talked about the Brian Flores defense, how it was unique in that we're rushing 3 or we're rushing 6, and
right.
And I was wondering, were they doing that because they could not rush the passer with 4 last year, and they came into this offseason and clearly said, we're going to fix that. Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, now Dallas Turner. Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner both have a lot of experience dropping into coverage. And in that bringing that scheme versatility that Flores covets. So I'm interested in that part of it. The scheme changes in Minnesota probably just going to be more conventional, rushing 4, but also have versatility. And I think that's part of the reason why they coveted Turner so much in this trade up. Just saying, again, any massive trade up like that is risky, and it's great for the Jags.
And the final point I'll make is that I think this range is actually more like where Dallas Turner should go than 8th overall. Like, remember, all the way through the process, we've been trying to walk this tightrope between saying Dallas Turner's not worth the 8th overall pick and saying, he's a bad player, because he's not, right? He's a good player. He's just he's slightly worse than other people were saying he was. And actually, he went behind Laiatu Latu and in the teens instead of 8th overall. It's actually, it's right. That's where he should go. Perfect.
Fine. Bengals take Amarius Mims, a tackle out of Georgia, at pick 18. So they finally go with the offensive lineman in the first round. Been rumored the last couple of years. They go O-line, and Mims can come in, and Trent Brown is the starter for at least 1 year here at right tackle. Mims can back him up and develop behind Trent Brown.
Is this the first one since Cedric Aboyhe?
Off the top of my head, it sounds no Billy Price.
Center. Yes. Ooh.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that chart that was going out the other day of hit rates.
Oh yeah.
12 out of 13 centers that signed a second contract with their team. Billy's the one.
Yeah.
There's only room for one Billy Price here in Cincinnati, and I know the guy. It's not the center. It's only room for one. So Amarius Mims, tackle to the Bengals.
I like that as well. I think this is a lot like the Fashanu pick for the Jets, where it's a good landing spot for him to go. This was a lot like, remember last year? It felt like all of the landing spots were great. Like even players you weren't wild on, you're like, that's actually a great spot for him to go. It's perfect. Yeah. This is kind of similar. So even players that you think are a little bit, they've got some work to do, or they need to sit for a while or whatever. Like they ended up in spots where that makes sense.
I mean, my lukewarm take on this draft was not only that I really like the top 20, 25 players, but also because they're all at high-value positions for the most part. I think everybody's going to feel pretty good coming out. There's not a whole lot of, oh, man, this team really blew it.
So Atlanta throws a spanner in the works of this, but it also feels like for a few years now, teams are just getting better at the draft. Like there's less crazy than there used to be.
I agree. I think there is.
So, yeah, like Amarius Mims, low on sample size, high on talent. The tape that we do have is pretty good. He's been a good pass blocker. We just haven't seen enough of it. And there's some technique and stuff to work on. But now he goes to a place that theoretically shouldn't need to start for a year.
Yeah.
Maybe he might need to if injuries, knocks one of the big Brown brothers down. And Mims has to come in and give relief off the bench. But a lot like Fashanu, I think that's a good pick for the future, which is, the Bengals have been doing that a lot. Future-proofing a position, drafting for next year, not this year. I like the fit.
That's what it is. So now the offensive line, it has the big money invested in left tackle and Orlando Brown. Trent Brown's just a one-year stopgap. Alex Kapp is making some money. Ted Karras is making some money, but nothing crazy. And now they've got the cheap guy, right, for 4 years, and they're hoping that he becomes the second contract guy. So they're.
Oh yeah, they also drafted Jonah Williams in the first round. It's not even
close. Oh yeah, I forgot about Jonah.
Not even close to the first.
Not even close. But yeah, it's a good pick for the Bengals, good fit, and yeah, it was one of those. He was here a bunch visiting in Cincinnati, so not terribly surprising.
Right.
Los Angeles Rams, they get to make a first-round pick. They did it. Pick 19
from the house, the beach house.
From the beach house, Jared Verse, the edge defender out of Florida State. Once again, you just kind of let the draft come to you. I think Verse was a top 15 player in this draft. I like the fit with the Rams because they need edge. I think they had a lot of different ways that they could go. We hadn't seen no corners are off the board yet as of pick 19. I think they could have gone that route, but they go with the power edge and Jared Verse.
Yeah, we reached an interesting point in the draft, I think, around now where there were some players available that you're like, wow, these guys are I mean, you know, the top corner off the board or whatever, right? Like positions that hadn't had a guy taken that we thought would go much higher. And you know, there are some teams that wouldn't necessarily be the most acute need. But you're like, they could definitely use that player. But yeah, the Rams end up going with Jared Verse. I like Verse. I think Verse absolutely should have been in the conversation for that first edge rusher off the board. Given Latu's sort of neck concerns, Verse would have been the next guy I turned to instead of Dallas Turner. He's a different player, and a lot of that is which style you prefer, you know, not necessarily which guy is better in abstract terms, but which skill set you covet the more. But Verse is this absolute monster, like powerful, strong, violent edge defender who goes seeking contact, right? Isn't just going to try and get around you. He's going to go through you or pretend like he's about to go through you and then just like chop your hands to the turf and fly around you on a shorter arc to the quarterback than he would have had to if he tried to run around you. Like he's a big problem for offensive tackles to block.
Chris falls in love with an edge defender every year. Or just, he says, hey, this is my guy, basically. A couple years ago, it was Jalen Phillips. He said, hey, this guy's the top edge. I think he was the first edge off the board. Then there was a run in 2021. And then Phillips has become the best edge, I think, from that group. He loved Jared Verse. He had him going 8 to the Falcons. And so when I said, hey, as you just said, should Verse have been in the number 1 overall conversation? Yeah, I mean, Chris had him there above Latu and Dallas Turner. So, hey, the Rams picked.
They picked
Jared Verse, number 21 overall. I like that for the Rams.
Yeah, there was the idea that they finally get this first round pick, but we know they're trying to find the way of zigging when everyone else zags, right? They don't want to do the conventional thing. They want to do something else. Like initially they thought the edge was trading those picks for proven players. Now they had a first round pick. Everyone was like, they're not going to stay there. They're going to use it to trade up and go get somebody huge, or maybe they'll trade down and do. Instead, they just pick.
They just picked, and they didn't directly try to replace Aaron Donald, but now Jared Verse with Kobe Turner there with last year's mid-round pick Byron Young, so they're getting a little bit better.
Yep. Up
front, not better without Donald, but needed this pick here.
Better after having lost
Donald. Yeah. All right, Steelers at 20. Troy Fautanu, the tackle out of Washington. We were debating whether or not he's a stay-at-tackle guy. Is he a guard? I think for the Steelers in particular, he's going to get a shot to play left tackle and take Dan Moore's job there.
Yeah.
Or maybe move to right tackle and let Broderick Jones move to left.
Right. Either way, he's playing tackle. Yeah, they've got Olu, James Daniels. He's going to be playing tackle at one of the spots. Which one would you do?
I'd probably let him play. I think they would probably let him just play left tackle. Broderick Jones, had some flashes at right tackle. Broderick Jones is bigger, right? They're really two left tackle type of bodies. Again, Fautano's more like 6'4", but has the long arms, so he's fine as far as tackle dimensions. I'd probably just let him play left tackle. I don't care that much. Either way, you've got somebody's doing something slightly different. Broderick Jones either flipping back to left tackle, or Fautanu's got to move to right tackle. But they're two tackles. Dan Moore's had 3 years and 3,600 snaps of below average play, and I think the Steelers get better here.
Yeah, I mean, so this is interesting because his biggest test is going to be the dude's facing Myles Garrett twice a year if he's playing left tackle.
Yeah.
And actually, like Dan Moore ends up with these below average grades, but his grade outside of playing Myles Garrett is actually average, if not slightly above average. It's just that when he plays Myles Garrett, his grade is like 6. So they're almost drafting this guy just so they don't have to play Dan Moore against Myles Garrett twice a year.
Yeah, I mean, Fautanu's got some technique to clean up. He was excellent in pass protection last year. Like, he moves unbelievably well. They might look at him and say, yeah, you're the best option.
Yeah,
for Myles Garrett.
Like, his problem when he loses is almost being like too aggressive.
Very aggressive.
But his speed, like he has the athleticism to match Myles Garrett in a way most linemen do not. Now, he might get over aggressive and try and go after Myles Garrett and get Matador to the floor and end up with the same problem. But he actually does have the tool set to be able to go one-on-one with Myles Garrett.
There's only like a handful of combine drills that I think really pop. And, I remember Joe Thomas's footwork back in 2007 at the combine. It's like, whoa, that dude just looks different, right? Fautanu's movement skills in every combine drill was like, that's pretty awesome. Yeah. Pretty special for whatever that's worth. That definitely stood out. I know Trevor absolutely loved him. So everybody's making good picks. They're all good picks.
Everyone won the draft.
We're all feeling good. Everybody got our guy. And most importantly, our guy loves football, loves to play football. Miami Dolphins at 21 go Chop Robinson. This was one of the first, not a massive surprise, but enough of a surprise. We thought there was a big 3 of edge. You said, hey, maybe Chop should be a part of make it a big 4 for edge rushers.
Yeah, so every year I kind of come late to reading my notes again, and you sort of either read your notes and realize this guy probably should be ranked in a different place, or I have him based off the way these notes fall, or even simply just sort of read your order again and went, oh yeah, I ranked that guy higher than I thought I did. And Chop Robinson was that guy for me this year, where I'm sort of reading my notes and I actually have him ranked in that top 4. And I'm like, why? I mean, we sort of asked this question again. Like, for some reason, the Penn State guys, maybe they just have a crappy PR department or something, but those guys, their draft stock just all died. And actually it didn't. Once we got to the draft, they were drafted where we thought they would go. It's just that the PR on them all process was terrible.
Yeah, Chop was the guy, like the first time I watched him, last year, or just watch, like, he transfers from Maryland and it's like, okay, that dude's got juice.
Yeah.
Usually guys with juice get drafted in the first round. Now he's got short arms, stumpy arms, as you would say. Stumpy arms, and he doesn't play the run all that well. Yeah, that might drop guys, but it's pass first league, and last year Will McDonald went in the first round as a designated pass rusher, basically. So that's what Robinson is. Can he develop against the run? Maybe, but it's a fascinating landing spot here in Miami because they're on paper deep at edge, but they all got hurt at the end of last season. So they're saying, hey, we're going to make sure we always have a slew of pass rushers ready to go next time we go into Kansas City when it's 30 below.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing with Chop Robinson, as you said, he has real juice as a pass rusher, and not just athleticism, but the production is there as well. Like back-to-back seasons with a pass rushing grade of 91.6 or better, right? That's insane. That's up there with elite top-tier players. His athleticism is also insane on off the charts. Like the 40 time, he got to 4.48, so he's under 4.5. That's 98th percentile. The splits are insane as well. The broad jump is 96th percentile. The shuttle and the 3-cone are 86th or better. He's a top-tier athlete in addition to being incredibly productive. And look, maybe he's the worst run defender of the 3 guys above him, but it's not like it's inconsequential, but you can be a relatively one-dimensional pass rusher in today's NFL in terms of run defense versus pass rush and still be a really impactful player. Like, you can hide that more now than you used to be able to, right? You can play a guy 500, 600, 700 snaps and only expose him against the run 100, 200 times. If he can rush the passer and get consistent pressure, that's an impactful player for you.
And he ended up at 27 on the consensus board. I just thought people would look at him in the top 15. Like, when I first watched his film last year, I thought, oh, people are going to look at him in the top. They're going to put him with Jared Verse. And I may have tweeted that during the offseason, like, hey, he's battling Jared Verse for maybe edge 1. And then, again, I think the lack of versatility and, 3-down ability probably.
But the more my point became, like, when I sort of started looking at the rest of this group, I'm like, I mean, he's so much closer to the big 3 than he is everybody else.
Yeah.
Like, he deserves to be in the first round and actually closer to those guys.
He didn't play a full season. I mean, he only about a little over 1,000 snaps of college football for Chop Robinson.
Right.
So Nice fit, I think, for Miami as well. Everybody's winning.
And it's similar to the Eagles when they were drafting these defensive linemen that didn't necessarily have a track record of playing, 800 snaps. They shouldn't need them to, right? And the Dolphins, with the edge rushers they're getting back from injury, they shouldn't need them to be anything more than, 500 snaps that fall sort of heavily 2-to-1 pass rushing to run defense,
Oh, I know. Eagles at 22. Finally, the first cornerback comes off the board. It's Quinyon Mitchell, corner out of Toledo, the first corner drafted in the first round by the Eagles since 2002. And we were wondering if Howie would do it. And
play the meme.
Not only that, he does it again. He takes the top corner on the board.
How does Howie do it meme? It happened again. He just sat there, let the board come to him.
He took a nap until it was his time to pick, and he woke up and took the top player
off the board
available.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Quinyon Mitchell, by the way, so number 9 on the PFF draft board and number 12 on the consensus board, gets him at 22.
Yeah. I mean, this was one of the I don't quite understand why the corners were sliding as much as they did. But yeah, for Philadelphia to get the top corner on most people's boards at pick number 22, it's not a position of glaring need in that theoretically they have 2 starters, but those 2 starters looked pretty old and, wearing down last year. So minimum, he's pushing to play and a succession plan right out of the gate.
Yeah, people were theorizing during free agency that maybe the NFL has stopped valuing corners. And I said, I pushed back a little bit. And it was like Jalen Johnson just signed one of the bigger contracts of all time for corners from the Bears. And my whole thing was, well, I just don't know who the top 5 corners are in the NFL. I don't think it's clear as day. I think all of the guys that you would say are the best, like a Jalen Ramsey, getting a little bit older, or a Jair Alexander, inconsistent. Like all the best guys, the most skilled corners are a little bit more inconsistent. And I thought that was a big part of the market maybe being depressed at corner. But I wonder if it is actually more of a league-wide trend. And pairing with more zone coverage, which generally takes a little bit less pressure off corners, puts more pressure on your middle-of-the-field players. And I wonder if that's part of it. Because I think there's 5 legitimate first-round corners in Cooper Dijon, and Kool-Aid McKinstry didn't go in the first round. And Quinyon Mitchell doesn't go till 22. I think Mitchell's a fantastic prospect, though. Awesome in off coverage, playmaker on the balls. I think he reads routes extremely well, fits what the Eagles want to do, and then he proved himself in man coverage, press coverage at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, a couple of years of, high-end elite play. His big sort of story was the defense he played. 2 things. One, the defense they played at Toledo meant he was playing basically off coverage the entire time, 0 press man anywhere in his tape. So all that was a projection. And because it's Toledo, the strength of competition is pretty lousy as well, right? So there's very little tape in terms of what happens when we put him in NFL situations against NFL caliber players. But then he goes to the Senior Bowl and essentially answers both of those things in the same week and looks amazing doing both of them, right? Played a ton of press coverage against NFL players in an all-star setting and looked great doing it. So that week, I think, essentially catapulted or cemented him as cornerback 1 on most people's boards.
All right, so then the Jags are back up on the clock at pick 23. They had just traded down. They take Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU. The reason why the trade down's good, I think the Jags probably would have taken Brian Thomas Jr. at 17. They pick up an extra 3rd and a 4th. There's also, a 7th or something swapped in there. But overall, the Jags pick up a couple nice draft picks next year and get receiver Brian Thomas Jr. I know we've talked about him quite a bit. The fit with Jacksonville, I'm kind of intrigued by this downfield threat for Trevor Lawrence, even though they don't have the high-volume guy I would prefer to have complementing Thomas.
Yeah, so this was the Vikings trade, right?
Yeah, this was the trade.
So they picked up
with the
3
Vikings.
picks. They picked up a 5th round this year and then a 3rd and a 4th next year.
Man, that's so much.
So it's a great trade.
That's a great trade.
For Jacksonville.
Most of the trades, just so you know, we run them through our simulator, and most of the trades are like, this team's going to win 55% of the time or 52% of the time. Jags win it 66% of the time. And it looks like a massive win on paper for them.
Yeah, so
and the reason why it's extreme, I think, is because the Vikings definitely said, Dallas Turner, top 10. They probably said he's a blue-chip player. We don't get blue-chip opportunities often. That's why they did it. But if you're the Jags and you're not going to value Dallas Turner that way, it's a huge win.
Yeah, whether or not Brian Thomas Jr. was the guy they would have picked at 17. It's a great deal for Jacksonville to trade down and pick up 3 extra picks.
Very good
all
business
of which
by the
are
Jags,
ahead
yes.
of the 5th round, or 5th round or earlier. That's great business for them. And if it was Brian Thomas Jr. that they were planning on picking at 17, it's even better. Look, our Brian Thomas Jr. conversation is well documented. We're lower on him than most people. I'm lower on him than you are. There's something to work with. I mean, his size, speed is stuff that plays at all levels. He has incredible potential. There are plays on his tape where he does incredible things, like that Florida State play down the sideline. There's amazing potential in there. I just have a lot of concerns. Most really good corners that he played did not have that many problems with him, despite the speed. Almost all of his production came on like 2 routes in that offense, and most of those plays were just destroying zone coverages where he wasn't like, it's that classic thing of we're running like a slot post route against off coverage, often by a safety. It's like that's a gimme. Like, you win that because you just run the route, right? If you're a fast guy, you win it every time. That guy has no shot of covering that play. So the question is, what can he do beyond that? How much more can we get out of him? Because that is one-dimensional, and it's the one dimension that the NFL is trying to take away at the moment. So if he can't be more than that, it's a concern. If he is only that, now you're saying, well, okay, we're plugging him in this offense with a guy that's similar in Gabe Davis, who we just signed. A guy, Christian Kirk, was at his best when he was running vertically from the slot. And this is an offense that kind of struggled with redundancy last year in trying to get 2 vaguely similar receivers doing similar things at the same time. So I'm not massively thrilled by the fit either. Like, I think there are places, like we talked about him going to the Colts, right? Would have been a great fit for the Colts because they already have Michael Pittman. He would have been replacing Alec Pierce as a kind of deep threat anyway, and then we can see what he can do beyond that. The Colts would have been a great fit for him.
Yeah.
I don't really love the fit in Jacksonville.
I mean, I'm intrigued by the vertical potential of the offense with Brian Thomas Jr., Gabe Davis averaging 16 and a half, 17 yards per catch.
It's like the 98 Vikings. It's 3 deep. Everyone's just going deep.
Yes, and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. Watching the Jags offense last year, though, there would be times where it's like, hey, good scheme. You have a wide open scheme, and usually Christian Kirk was the beneficiary of that. And then other times, I remember watching Trevor Lawrence being like, he's throwing like an 18-yard comeback, like it's 1998 into a tight window, and he would make it, but everything just felt like it was a lot of hard work to pick up 15, to pick up 20. And I still don't know that Brian Thomas Jr., he might help the over-the-top game every now and again. I just don't know if we have that guy. Who's getting open between 15 and 20 yards? Who's getting open underneath? Who's getting open and just giving me some easy in this offense? They're still lacking that, but I'm intrigued by the big play potential here in Trevor Lawrence throwing the ball down the field.
And the other thing about this pick is we were all convinced this was going to be Terrion Arnold, given the way the draft had fallen, right? Jacksonville traded down. They'd done great business with that trade. And Terrion Arnold, the corner, is still on the board. He's a lot of people's CB1. Slam dunk, like obvious, run it in. Jacksonville, what are you doing? And then Brian Thomas Jr. is the pick. So from that point of view, it was a curious one as well, and that it seemed like an obvious pick was something else.
I know, based off our evaluations of Brian Thomas Jr. and Terrion Arnold, if they had traded down and still gotten Arnold, we would have said they
Loved
won.
it. Yeah.
They would have won the draft.
And I still think it's a good. I mean, the composite of all of it together is good, right?
It's very good. Yes,
they traded
absolutely.
down.
Yeah.
They got 3 extra picks. I don't love the player or the fit there.
So speaking of Terrion Arnold, with a beautiful segue, Sam, the Lions are the team that trade up to get him at 24. Lions give up a third to the Dallas Cowboys. Again, from a Cowboys perspective, a fantastic trade. Most of the time when you're trading down, you're doing it because you feel good about getting your guy when you trade down. I think Dallas probably did. But Detroit goes and makes an aggressive move to fill their biggest need at corner with one of the top 1 or 2 corners in the draft in Terrion Arnold.
Yeah. So what was this trade? Lions get
third.
24 and a 2025 7th rounder. The Cowboys get 29 and a 3rd rounder this year, 73 overall.
Yeah. And once we get to 73, we're going to be like, oh, that's a pretty good.
Sure.
There's some pretty good players on the board at 73 to pick.
It's a similar trade to the Vikings trade in terms of, I think this was another case of Detroit looking at this and saying, we can't believe that this guy, Terrion Arnold, is still on the board. We never considered the idea that he would be there in reach of our pick.
They go through so many practice runs and simulations. I wonder how often. I wonder if the Vikings ever did a simulation that had Dallas Turner,
right.
And I wonder if the Lions ever did one where they're sitting at 29 and they had a chance to get Arnold.
This is why we rail against this every year, right? All these people, you do a mock draft and you get all these people going, 0 chance this guy is available at this spot, right? And every year this kind of stuff happens. And if you don't, it's impossible to consider all of the times, all the players that could possibly fall to every single spot. But the point is, I don't think that the Vikings thought there was a scenario where Dallas Turner would be within reach of them, that they could get a trade to make it happen. I don't think the Lions thought there was a scenario where Terrion Arnold, the cornerback 1 on a lot of boards or 2 on most other ones, would be within reach of them. And so, yeah, if you've got to overpay, I guess, relative to the board, relative to the analytics, to get a guy that you think is a blue chip player and maybe the top corner on your board, it's probably worth the gamble.
Arnold was 11th on the consensus board, 14th on the PFF board. They get him at 24, give up the 3rd for it. Again, if I'm Dallas, I do that all day. That's fine. And then with Detroit, they're in an interesting spot where they had all the extra draft picks last year, right? I mean, I'm a general, hey, trade down, don't trade up type of guy. But I do think you can look at moves in their cumulative effect over multiple years and say, look, we had 5 picks in the top 50 last year. And 4 of them went out there and pretty much hit and were awesome. We can afford to give up a little bit of depth. That's the risk here, to go get Terrion Arnold, who fits a need at corner, is going to start or compete with Emmanuel Mosley to start opposite Carlton Davis III, and Detroit just continues to get better.
I wonder, I think, have you made this point before, that when teams have somebody else's pick, they tend to treat it as house money?
Yeah, I think
so. The Lions traded away Minnesota's draft pick.
Yeah, a lot of times they do that. They get this comp pick. It's not ours anyway. Just flip it for something. I mean, it's not the right way to do it because you own it and you have it. But look, I think there's something to looking at moves in their totality. What's the whole draft? What's the whole 2-year draft? And 2 years ago, the Lions made a massive trade up from 30 to 12 to get Jameson Williams. Last year, they had all the extra picks. This year, they're trading up again. I kind of like the idea. It's like diversifying your portfolio type of deal. So it's not always just you can't just draft 15 times every year. So you mix it up a little bit. That's what the Lions are doing here.
It's also interesting because I wonder, there's a lot of teams seem to be doing this year, where make sure you get a pick back of any description, right? Because at that point, you can then start to look at it in terms of, now we can just take the pick that we spend and create an actual overall value of what that is. We're not actually losing any draft picks. We're just changing how much this one is worth, right?
Yeah.
So they can now add the 3rd rounder into pick number 24 and say, this is what this was worth, right?
Yeah.
And if that shakes out to, I haven't run it, but if that shakes out to like 18, right? 18 overall for Terrion Arnold, it's about where he should go, right? So from that perspective, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, but the reason why it's good for Dallas
is they get an extra pick.
Right. They probably would have picked the same guy, and then it's like, add pick 73 to the mix. They might get their starting center at pick 73, right? Dallas might come out of this and say they got their left tackle, Guyton, and they get Cedric Van Pran from Georgia as their starting center, and they're like, man, we just got 2 starters for the price of 1, and they're going to feel great about it. Lions feel great about it. We love Terrion Arnold as a player, maybe the best man coverage corner.
Yeah,
in the draft.
This is such an unusual draft in terms of, 14 straight offensive players, all the defensive players getting pushed down the board, and we saw 2 trades, I think, that were direct consequences of that, because random defenders that were consensus top players on the board were suddenly available way deeper in the draft than teams were expecting them to be. And I think Minnesota, quote unquote, overpaid to go get Dallas Turner, and I think the Lions, quote unquote, overpaid to go get Terrion Arnold. But I think in both cases, they will think that was worth it.
Yeah, and I don't think it was because it was a bad defensive draft necessarily. It was just a really good offensive draft at the right positions, right?
Yeah. And by the way, they might be proved correct, like the Will Anderson trade, we said similar things last year. Like, they overpaid to make that happen. It's unlikely to go their way, and it's gone their way so far.
And So the final Will Anderson tally was Darius Robinson's added to it, at least. So just saying. We'll see. Jordan Morgan is the pick at 25 to the Green Bay Packers. I think a lot of people had the Packers taking Cooper DeJean, whatever. It's late.
Mustard.
It's almost 2. Mustard. Or Graham Barton. Graham Barton was still on the board here. Didn't go to the Packers. They go Jordan Morgan from Arizona. Another one of those guys that people said, hey, he could play tackle, could kick into guard, but definitely more of a pure tackle, I think, than Graham Barton.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting because Rasheed Walker seemed like he'd put it together by the end of last year. Like, he started the season, and actually even before that, like in preseason and training camp, you're like, oh, that dude can't play left tackle for them. And it started off quite rough, but then by the end of the year, he was playing pretty well outside of a game. So, yeah, they've kind of at least prioritized replacing him.
They have. And I don't know, he's a former, 7th-round pick? So it's just, you could add some depth.
Oh, sure. I'm not, you wouldn't say Rasheed Walker should keep you away from drafting a guy at the first round, but it is interesting they went in that direction.
More versatility for Green Bay. Morgan, really good pass protection grade last year. I think he showed well against pretty decent pass rushers, showed that he can handle himself. He's got some issues to iron out on tape, but again, the Packers have done a really nice job of taking, I think Zach Tom, I know the model loved him. Zach Tom, I think, was a really good mid-round prospect. Based off PFF grades, some of my numbers, I think I should look at this. Which teams have actually taken a guy that some measure says probably shouldn't be that great and have turned them into pretty good players?
Right.
Packers have a pretty good history of
they've done
churning
wonders,
those out.
with that offensive line in recent years.
So it's another guy to throw into the mix there. They're one of the weirdest teams to evaluate because every other team's, good fit, and this will be the Packers don't have all these needs because they're just so young and have players everywhere. The only big need is probably linebacker. So Morgan added to the mix there at pick 25.
Yep.
Graham Barton finally comes off the board. It's at pick 26 to the Bucs. Probably stepping in to play some guard there for the Bucs.
Yeah, I never quite saw the 5-position player thing. I feel like he was an interior player fairly conclusively.
Chris loved him. Chris would have come to tackle.
Yeah. But he's not alone. I mean, a lot of people were talking about him as this 5-position player thing. I just didn't quite see that. I thought he was fairly clearly an interior player, but now he goes in there, probably starts at left guard for them right away, and addresses an offensive line that's definitely lost a lot since the heyday with Tom Brady.
Wrote an article this week quantifying upside, looking at positions where you can actually look at measurables and maybe find some players who actually have upside, who show improvement at the next level. That's my synopsis.
Yep.
Graham Barton, one of those players.
There you go.
So he had the very good combine. I think he does project well as a tackle to guard conversion. And I think the Bucs really wanted, I think they would have taken Chop Robinson maybe if he was still there.
Yeah, possibly.
But Barton, a pretty good player that we were theorizing could go as high as, in the teens. So
yeah, there was a lot of buzz around Graham Barton for certainly in the last few weeks. I guess he's still, 26 still a pretty impressive place to go. But, it didn't quite sneak as high as people were expecting him to.
Arizona Cardinals with their second pick. It's Darius Robinson, the edge/interior defensive lineman from Missouri. Cardinals have just massive need anywhere along the defensive line, anywhere rushing the passer, and Darius Robinson might fill both spots a little bit and show some versatility.
Yeah, I like this pick. All of these sort of ones at the bottom are kind of conditioned by what was left on the board, and Johnny Newton from Illinois was a guy that fell out of the first round. So for the sort of a bunch of the bottom picks in the first round, you're like, you could have had Johnny Newton. So I would have taken Johnny Newton over Darius Robinson, but I do think Darius Robinson is a good pick for them. And specifically for that defense, I think he fits there better than almost anywhere else in the league. Robinson there's a ton of tweeners in this draft. These interior/edge players that don't quite belong in either spot. I've said this, in 2004, Darius Robinson would have been a top 10 draft pick to the Steelers or the Patriots, if any of those teams were ever picking in the top 10 at that time. But classic old 3-4, defensive end, he would have been a perfect fit for that. The dude is really powerful. He's got good enough pass rushing moves. He's not quite fast enough to really attack the edge, as a 4-3 edge rusher or as a 3-4 outside linebacker. But obviously, his 40 time was a 5 flat or something ridiculous. He's slow as hell in terms of top speed. but he's quite quick in short areas. Like if you get those plays where the guy arrives at the quarterback and the quarterback then just outruns him to the sideline.
Yeah.
Like any quarterback in the NFL pretty much is going to outrun him if they can get past him, which is not easy. Like if they can get by him, they'll outrun him. But he's quite difficult to get by because he's really big, really long, and actually has quite good change of direction and length to be able to attack those guys.
Yeah, he's a real interesting player because his production profile by our PFF numbers, pass rush grade, run defense grade, is not great for a first-round pick. But then at the Senior Bowl, had the best pass rush grade at practice, any edge rusher that we've seen the last 6 or 7 years. Jermaine Johnson had similar profile. Took him a couple of years. He started to figure out. The intriguing thing about Robinson, what you said, maybe the multi-gap ability, kick inside, play outside. But he was a problem at the Senior Bowl. Yeah. Very impressive in person.
And he gave a coach his resume.
That was Bruce Feldman's interview. Nice. So then this is like when you go back looking at the draft, this next storyline is going to be one of the biggest ones. The Buffalo Bills are on the clock at pick 28.
In desperate need of a wide receiver.
4 wide receivers are off the board, and it's the consensus top 4 wide receivers who are gone.
Yeah.
Which means wide receivers 5 through 15, pick a name, put them in the first round, nobody bats an eye. We've said that for a while. So we said, okay.
The Bills could have picked any one of 10 players at this spot.
Who do the Bills like at receiver? Now, they've got a million picks. They could still draft receivers. But sitting at pick 28, they're trading down. Okay, who are they trading down with? It's the Kansas City Chiefs. They traded down with the Chiefs. Then we were like, hey, a lot of tackles are coming off the board. Chiefs probably need to draft a left tackle. They're very responsible with their first-round picks. They like to draft those high-value positions. They trade up, the Chiefs, and they get Xavier Worthy, the fastest man in the draft, maybe the fastest man in the NFL, 4.2140. Add him to Marquise Brown.
Yeah.
And Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce, and now all of a sudden the Chiefs look like they've got some playmakers again.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating on a number of levels. So number one, I think Xavier Worthy is so much more than just the 4.2140. Like, when I watched this tape, I got some sort of Jordan Addison feelings. I got some Stephon Diggs feelings, actually, as well, in terms of ability to run routes, ability to cut, to bait defenders, to do a lot more than just like run by guys. Like he's actually quite a sophisticated wide receiver. I think he's 165 pounds or something stupid to run the 4.21. I think he's stronger than that. Like he attacks soft shoulders and tries to run through people. And okay, he doesn't make it through people, but he gets like 3 yards doing it. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't just fall over dead on contact. He'll actually fight for some additional yards after the hit. So I actually think he's a much more well-rounded receiver than people give him credit for. And in this amazingly good draft class, you can rank him anywhere from 4 to 15 or whatever. But like I think he has the potential to do real damage. And for the Bills to, number one, pass up on that. Number two, voluntarily trade with Kansas City, who have to be seen as their biggest rival and biggest obstacle and the team they can't get past. Like you have and the last time they traded with them, they gave him Patrick Mahomes. So for them to sort of be happy doing that deal with Kansas City in the first place is fascinating. For them to also do it when Kansas City ends up drafting a wide receiver is even more fascinating. I'm incredibly interested whether they found out who they were taking. Like, was that part of the deal? When Kansas City was on the phone, did they say, who are you taking? And they were like, Xavier Worthy. Or like, oh, cool, no problem then. Or did they were like, we're not telling you?
I don't think that happens.
I don't know. I think it definitely happens. I don't know if it happened in this instance.
In the trade, Buffalo essentially moves up twice from 133 to 95 and from 248 to 221.
Yeah.
So there's 2 pick swaps in there for Kansas City to move up those 4 spots to get Xavier Worthy. I mean, we're going to be sitting here in a playoff game, and Xavier Worthy's either going to have like a 60-yard touchdown to win the game or drop to lose the game against Buffalo. This is what I'm saying. And the unbelievable future storyline here between the AFC rivals, Worthy's fast, and like you said, has a little bit more to it. I think I thought he had elements where his ball skills were inconsistent, Mike Wallace-ish, where he'd fight it a little bit, but I think he can track it. And again, he's not just fast; he's fast on the football field as well, can track it down the field, create big plays.
And so Buffalo ends up trading down twice. They end up trading out of the first round entirely, albeit just to pick to 33. So the team that we thought, and they already had, was it 11, 10 draft picks to start the draft?
And all they've done is move up a couple times, not necessarily added picks.
And
right?
taken trades that effectively are viewed as almost coin flips. They haven't they haven't won the trade like the Jacksonville or the Dallas trade where they've absolutely fleeced somebody to do that deal. They have moved down at a position where they were in a position to take the fifth wide receiver off the board, their biggest area of need. In doing so, they've allowed 3 teams to draft wide receivers before they're coming up again, and 2 of them were on the list of the 5 most common receivers draft to Buffalo in the PFF mock draft sim. So this is a fascinating decision-making process by Buffalo towards the end of this draft.
I assume that they want receivers, and they just probably lumped them all together.
Yeah.
Their only counter now
but even then,
is Jermaine Burton.
Even then, because they're not picking up extra draft picks and they already had a ton of them, it still feels like you would value, even if you think there's a ton of them together, it still feels like you would value the decision to take the one you want the most.
I can't wait to see what they do the next couple days.
Like, who's their guy?
We'll find out. All right, Dallas is up again at pick 29. This is the trade down from Detroit. They go Tyler Guyton, the tackle out of Oklahoma. Guyton looks like he's going to step right in, play left tackle with Tyler Smith hanging out, staying at left guard.
Yeah.
A need pick for the Cowboys.
A need pick for the Cowboys.
A lot of people do like Tyler Guyton, and I don't want to – look, he's got unbelievable potential. When he does it right, it looks great. He just doesn't do it right as often as others.
Correct.
That's my breakdown.
What does the model say about Tyler Guyton?
It's red.
Ooh.
Red is an avoid.
Now,
Darnell Wright
also red.
Was a red last year. He had a decent rookie season. Wasn't great. A lot of people loved him too. But, yeah, Guyton's the one red. And then when you see the film, he's got about 1,000 career snaps. I see the grip strength is unbelievable. But, just looking through he's got a lot of work to do. And you saw it at the Senior Bowl too. Senior Bowl, he'd have this unbelievable rep, and then the next time just completely whiff with his punch.
Right.
So I think a lot of people see Guyton as 2 or 3 years away. And it's an interesting match with Dallas because he probably has to play right away. And it's Dallas. You're playing with Super Bowl aspirations every single year, and sometimes it takes offensive linemen a couple years to develop.
I know you poo-pooed this comment on the draft show, but the last project offensive tackle that Dallas took ended up being Tyler Smith, who was really good right away. And you were like, yeah, but Tyler Smith was really good in college. He had really good grades.
What did the model say about Tyler Smith?
But also, the point I would make is that they had very comparable pass blocking grades. Tyler Smith's grade was dominant as a run blocker, where at Tulsa he was just smushing people. But his pass blocking grade was also, I think, in the high 70s, kind of where Guyton's is.
Yeah, we did have Tyler Smith a little bit below where you'd want to be from a pass blocking grade. Unbelievable in the run game. I had Tyler. I would say he wasn't as developmental. I had him as a model guy, whereas Guyton's not even close.
Right, because he doesn't have the run blocking. Instead of a 90 run blocking grade, his is 60 or whatever.
Yeah, so I get it. And look, the potential is absolutely there for Guyton. He also played right tackle for Oklahoma, so he's going to flip probably and go play left tackle there. You have Terrence Steele there at right tackle. So it's an interesting move for Dallas. Jim Nagy on our show compared him to Tyron Smith before the Senior Bowl, and he gets to go be the guy to replace Tyron Smith in Dallas.
Yeah. I guess the Tyler Smith thing, they were allowed to keep him at guard. That probably didn't hurt. Now he played a bit of tackle as well and looked good doing that. It's just an interesting thing because Dallas has been one of those teams that, to their credit, they have drafted really well in the last X number of years. They've been arguably the best drafting team in the NFL or one of the top 3. And they're taking
outstanding first-round offensive line history.
And they're taking this guy who is a developmental tackle prospect, but not the same way as some other guys because at least there is good tape there. It's just inconsistent. You get a lot of developmental guys where they don't even have any good tape yet. It's just the traits are there. He's got the traits and some good tape, just not enough of it.
Yeah, it's one of the more interesting ones for me. I said on the show, I think he's got the most developing to do of any of the first rounders. We'll just see how quickly
of
that
all
comes
the
about.
first rounders, the two that I would be scared of the most if I was the team that had drafted them are Guyton and Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think it's terrible. I just think I'd be nervous.
Yeah, and my only take on that is it's okay. It's okay if I pass on them and they're going to be good, but I don't want to be the one to do the developing.
Right.
I don't want to go through that.
Yeah, because it's scary.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair way of assessing it. What do we have here? Pick 30, Nate Wiggins from Clemson, the cornerback. We got 3 more picks to get through here. So
God, how is that possible?
I'm having so much fun. Ravens take Nate Wiggins, the corner. Now, the Ravens were discussed. Hey, we need offensive linemen. A lot of people pegging offensive linemen for the Ravens, but they go corner. Wiggins is going to join Brandon Stevens and Marlon Humphrey at corner. This feels like a best player on the board, non-need pick here for the Ravens.
Yeah, just value, right?
Which I like. I have to compliment that because I like that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what you should do. I mean, Nate Wiggins, I think, has some of the purest coverage skills of anybody in this draft class, probably the best. He can play man or zone coverage at a really high level. He was 23rd overall on the consensus big board. And, his concern is the size, right? The weight. And I don't think that's as big of a problem for him as it is for some other lighter weight corners.
Do you think it shows up on film a little bit? I thought there was times where he couldn't jar the ball loose, couldn't break passes up with just lack of strength.
Yeah, but a little bit as opposed to Emmanuel Forbes where it showed up quite a lot, right? Yeah. And you like Forbes, it was sort of regularly, that dude is clinging on to try and stay physically, and he sort of overcomes it with feistiness. But every now and again, like it shows up sometimes with Wiggins, but not to the point where you're like, that's a real problem.
Yeah, I liked Wiggins a lot. He had this, he ran the 4.28 at the combine. It shows up on the field. He had that play against North Carolina where he runs from the other side of the field and forces a fumble. I'm sure every draft room, they're like, oh, watch this hustle play. I mean, teams are going to love that part of Wiggins. I also said, look, when the Chiefs and Ravens play, I assume they're going to play a lot in the next few years. We get to see Wiggins go up against Xavier Worthy and 4.28 versus 4.21, covering one-on-one. It gives some versatility to the Ravens on the back end, a little different body type and athlete there. So I like that. And then, not that you're drafting for need, but the Ravens came in here with some offensive line needs, and I assume they're going to have to address them at some point now.
Yeah, still work to do, still positions to need, but he gave up, 1 touchdown last year, a passer rating of 44 into his coverage, and I think he can get heavier than that. Like I think he probably plays around 180, but I think you could probably get at least 5, maybe 10 more pounds on him over the first 18 months of his NFL career.
Puts the Niners up on the clock at 31, and this is probably is this the second most surprising pick?
Maybe, yeah.
Of the first round, Ricky Pearsall, the wide receiver out of Florida. I'm a Ricky Pearsall guy. I'm a fan. I did not expect him to go in the first. I thought Alad McConkey could go in the first. I thought some of these other guys could. Pearsall is the guy I didn't think teams would actually do it.
Yeah.
But they did. The Niners get Pearsall.
I've said that, like I've said all the way along, like any one of 15 wide receivers could have gone in the first round. It wouldn't have shocked me.
He was on the lower end of the 15, though.
And not even necessarily that, but it's more who was still there when they took him, right?
Yeah,
like,
true.
Pearsall over A.D. Mitchell, I think, is surprising as a pick. Now, not necessarily for San Francisco, but just generally as a concept. So that part was shocking. But I think the point, I think a lot of people got stuck on Pearsall as just a slot receiver, right? Like he's a slot receiver. He's a kind of classic, smaller technician, route runner, little quick guy. And then he showed up at the combine and had like a measurable profile that's as good as any receiver in the draft. You're like, oh, and he's quite big. He's like 6'1". He's not, as short. He's not a Wes Welker. Like we are talking about a serious-sized technician who also happens to be one of the best athletes in the class.
That's one of the advantages, though, of the Shanahan offense or the way McVay runs his offense is everybody gets the slot benefits, basically.
Right.
The slot benefits being the tighter splits, the motion. So if a guy, because the reason why you would say this guy's a slot only, you say, oh, he can't beat press coverage or he can't win on the outside. And it's like you just give Ricky Pearsall a little short motion and have him do Z receiver type of stuff. And he's getting into the secondary in a hurry, and you don't have to worry about that.
Just to run through his measurables, right? Nothing is ranked lower than the 81st percentile, which was his bench press, right? Actual movement skills, his 4.41 40 was the worst measurable he had, which is the 86th percentile. His three cone was 6.4 seconds, which is record breaking. His vertical jump was 42 inches, which is the 99th percentile. Like, he's genuinely one of the most insane athletes, not just this year, but like ever.
And Pearsall is on my upside list for receivers. There's a few positions where you could chase upside and maybe benefit from it. I looked at all the guys that have improved historically from college to the NFL, looked at their measurables, and Pearsall's better in measurables than all the guys that have improved the most over the years. And when you watch Florida, he's just the best player on the offense, on a not good offense. He just kept making big plays. So intriguing pick by the Niners. It opens up, the other storylines. Is Deebo Samuel getting traded? Is Brandon Ayuk getting traded? Or are they all just going to play football together and just have another weapon for Brock Purdy?
And then with the wide receiver run underway, David Tepper couldn't take it and had to trade up one spot into the first round.
Buffalo Bills trade down once again. So this time the Panthers trade a sixth rounder, pick 200, for the Bills' fifth round pick. Sorry, the Bills get 141, fifth round pick.
The Bills
for the Panthers,
moved up.
round six.
The Bills moved up 59 spots.
59 spots
in the fifth round, essentially.
Right, from the sixth to the fifth.
Yeah, to move up one.
For the Panthers to move up. For the Panthers to move up one spot.
Yeah,
we got all that. So the Panthers get Xavier Leggett, wide receiver out of South Carolina.
Yeah, the guy we expected them to get just a pick earlier, and with a trade to make it happen. I like that move for Carolina. I think that was the receiver that always made a lot of sense for them. He's the guy. So as good as this wide receiver class is, I don't think it is particularly strong in terms of ex-receiver talent. Guys that are, big, can defeat press coverage, can win on the outside in all situations. Leggett is one of those guys, though. He's huge. He's strong. He's a contested catch monster. His speed is ridiculous as well. He can, run after the catch. And specifically, all of a sudden, that receiving core went from like one of the worst rooms in the NFL to that looks pretty strong quite quickly. Now it's Xavier Leggett as your X, Deontay Johnson as your flanker, Adam Thielen in the slot, Jonathan Mingo is like a reclamation. Let's see if you have anything as a big slot.
Mingo as your four deep threat is probably where he should be.
Or as a big slot. Like, you and Adam Thielen platoon as the slot because Thielen's getting on, and we'll see what we have here.
Would love to see another tight end in there. But, yeah, they've done some work to add some playmakers. I mean, what it really was Deontay Johnson and Xavier Leggett. That's what they've added to the mix, and it does make it look so much better on paper just with Leggett's potential. I mean, the concern there is he was a fifth-year breakout player. Historically, the best receivers in the NFL show some level of production much earlier in their lifespan.
With
their
some
career.
Reasons in there. He lost parents and there was stuff there that explains a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm just saying what the data says and then what he brings to the table. He gets to top speed very quickly. Yeah. After the catch. So there's some big playability, showed pretty well at the Senior Bowl. I don't know how versatile he is as far as the whole route tree goes, but I think he's got something to work with. And like you said, there's not a whole lot of the big-bodied, win on the outside type of guys in this draft.
Yeah, and again, a little bit like DK Metcalf, you don't need him to be able to do everything right away, even if he can't, even if he is a little bit limited and he's going to be that sort of, he only runs a 50% of a route tree. That's fine. We have Deontay Johnson who can run a complete route tree on the other side. We have Adam Thielen who's a technician. Like, we don't need you to do everything.
That's the trick with receivers, right? When I talk about Tyler Guyton, I'm like, man, that dude's got to be ready for 1,000 snaps. With Leggett, it's like, all right, well, if he's wide receiver 3 and just eased in, that's fine. That's a good start for him. Uh-huh. You mentioned DK Metcalf. Dave Canales was coming out of Seattle. He had DK Metcalf, saw how they used him there. So some connections there as well. Is that it? Is that all we have to talk about?
We talked about Buffalo trading out. Did anyone else trade out of the first round? Is that it?
No.
Just them?
I think that's it.
Then we got Houston and Cleveland that haven't picked yet.
Minnesota, the most aggressive team, and they only traded up one spot for their quarterback.
Yeah,
the Dallas Turner pick.
So on the one hand,
was the most aggressive move.
They're one of the most interesting teams because they potentially tried to get Drake Maye, swung and missed. They then had, I guess, if you want to, it's all about how you frame it all, right? They then had the discipline to sort of wait out the JJ McCarthy thing and not do the crazy trade for him. They ended up securing him for very little, only trading up the one spot to make that happen. And then they got much more aggressive with the second first-round pick and went and got Dallas Turner, a guy that was seen as the top defender on the board by most people and a sort of available 9 picks later than he was expected to be. So it's certainly an interesting draft from them.
Heading into round 2, so this is PFF NFL podcast. Most people, I can't, there's over 3,500 people watching us live right now on YouTube.
How are people still awake?
I appreciate you. Every draft year, I'm always pleasantly surprised how many people are reading content and reacting and active on Twitter and sitting here watching us live after we just did 4 hours.
I've been up since 6 a.m.
Have you?
Yeah.
Make it a 24-hour
My 11-year-old daughter decided to get up at 6 a.m. and phone all of her school friends on Zoom and do a homework assignment.
Oh, you should be proud.
No, well,
Extra
so
work.
I tweeted that out, and people were like, "Oh, way to humble brag about your, brilliant kid." I'm like, "No, this is a homework assignment that was due today. Like, this was something she hadn't done at this point, and decided to do at 6 in the morning."
Best work comes under heat. Under
Yeah,
pressure.
exactly.
Yeah.
Deadline spark action, or whatever that saying is.
Yeah, that whole thing. Oh man, I've pulled all-nighters for that.
Right.
For procrastinating. Yeah, you should probably teach her some time management.
Or at least, go be quieter.
Oh, that too.
If you want to be up at 6, that's cool. Just don't wake me up at 6.
Oh man, what a day! Draft round 1. I'm still going. I'm still fired. We get questions from the chat.
You were breaking out the model. What were you?
Well, I was going to look
top
at the best
available according to the model.
Yeah, like who's best available? Like Troy Franklin's still on the board.
Yes.
Troy Franklin tomorrow.
Is that Buffalo's pick? That was a lot. We were a lot of Troy Franklin at 28.
We had a lot of Buffalo, Troy Franklin. So they're picking at 33. They get the first pick tomorrow.
Yeah. Now, here's another. Do they trade it? Because 33 and 30, like
probably
the first couple of picks of the second round are very popular trade spots usually.
They probably will. Johnny Newton's still on the board.
Yep.
Cooper DeJean, the mustard, is still on the board.
A.D. Mitchell still available.
A.D. Mitchell
Kool-Aid,
still on the board.
Jackson Powers Johnson.
Edgerrin Cooper, I think the best linebacker.
Linebacker 1 hasn't gone yet. Safety 1 hasn't gone yet.
Running back 1 hasn't gone
Running
yet.
back won't go for a while.
As I said
Center
before,
1.
I think it's the players. I don't think it's just a positional value thing, but no safety, linebacker, or running back is like sniffing the first round.
Right.
Here. And that's meshing with positional value around the NFL. So,
but there's a lot of good players still available at the top.
And then the tackle run did not include Kingsley Suamataia. I knew there's an extra syllable than we had been using. Matia.
Yeah, well, we lost it.
BYU still available. Patrick Paul from Houston. Roger Rosengarten. Suamataia. Roger Rosengarten from Washington. So you can't say Washington because there's 2 of them.
Right.
So there's still a couple tackles, 3 tackles in there. Washington's got a tackle that they're going to need. The Patriots have a tackle that they need. So there's a couple of those. The Ravens need some offensive line help.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of questions. Number 1, does Buffalo stay at 33?
I think they'll make a pick here.
Okay.
They just have so much draft capital. Why do they need to wheel and deal anymore?
Right.
Pick a player.
Which wide receiver do they draft?
Lad McConkey.
Okay.
I would take Troy Franklin.
Okay.
They're going to take Lad McConkey.
Number 2, which, if you're a team trading up into these first couple of picks, who are you coming after? Who's the player that's fallen out of the first that you want to trade up and get?
Jackson Powers Johnson. I'm not trading up to get anybody, but the guys I want the most. Powers Johnson.
Okay, forget you because you wouldn't do this. But
Jackson
what
Powers
team
Johnson
is going to trade up for what player? Forget the team.
Give me the list.
Who is the player that is going to be traded up for at the top of the second round?
One of the tackles.
Okay.
Making sure that there are tackles. BYU, potentially. A.D. Mitchell. People don't like A.D. Mitchell.
He is a curious. He was
Johnny
always,
Newton, right? People want Johnny Newton.
Newton is the one that's intriguing to me because he is that natural 3-tech pass rushing defensive tackle that actually played that in college. Little bit surprised he fell out of the first round. I'd be very surprised if he fell much further. Adonai Mitchell is intriguing, though, because he was always quite an interesting evaluation, but I did think the NFL would like him to the tune of a first-rounder.
You want to stay up all night?
No.
Watch this.
No, I don't.
Let's do Let's do a mock draft. Let's do a day 2 mock right now. Let's do it.
In the booth are going to kill you.
Let's do it. All right, last question. Which Michigan Wolverine do the Chargers draft at pick 37?
Somebody was saying there's like a prop on the fact that they will draft no Michigan players. Everyone's been like, how many are they going to draft?
There's too many.
0.
Too many Michigan players.
Right.
Mike Sanders still at pick 37 for the Chargers.
So they got their tackle. No, Roman Wilson.
Oh, Roman Wilson. They need their receivers. Yeah. Roman Wilson to the Chargers at pick 37. It's a receiver. It's Harbaugh's least favorite Wolverine. Out of all, there's so many trench players in there that Harbaugh loves way more.
Son, you're like my least favorite son.
But we needed you.
Yeah.
It's a need pick. All right, we're out of here. This is we appreciate everybody. Seriously, you guys watched the live draft. You stayed with us after. You're listening to us on your way to work on a Friday morning, hearing our round 1 takes. We appreciate everybody for being a part of the PFF NFL podcast. We're going to be again live on Friday night doing day 2, and then we're going to recap the entire draft. We'll repeat everything we just said
again
and talk about rounds 2 through 7, team by team, Monday through Thursday next week.
And we appreciate all the people in the booth that are still here at 2:20 a.m.
Thank you, guys. Go get some more pizza, take a nap, and we'll do it again tomorrow. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again next week with more PFF NFL podcast.